When it comes to creepy missing person cases, even the most mundane text message can be chilling if it's the last time the person is heard from before they mysteriously disappear. Samuel Seagal mysteriously disappeared in January of 2022 after sending a final creepy text message to his sister before vanishing without a trace. His final moments were caught on a CCTV camera at the Glenbrook National Park in New South Wales, Australia. It was just before 2 p.m. on January 15th that Ashley Seagal last heard from her brother. He sent her a text message to say he was driving and asked if she would like to chat. Ashley was out with friends at the time, but replied a little over an hour later to ask if he was still driving. Samuel responded that he wasn't, but he would call her later. Ashley said that sounded good, but Samuel didn't respond. There didn't seem to be anything out of character about the text messages, and Ashley phoned Samuel later that day as they had arranged, but he didn't answer. She called him a few more times but got no response. Over the next week, Ashley tried to contact Samuel multiple times but never got a response. She then discovered that he hadn't shown up for work. Samuel worked as an arborist, a job he cared about a lot. It was extremely strange for him to not show up without letting anybody know first. About a week after Samuel's last text message to Ashley, she reported him missing. Police investigating the mysterious missing person case soon found Samuel's car parked at Jellybean Pool Car Park in Glenbrook National Park. Samuel would often spend his weekends at various national parks in the surrounding area, but according to his sister, he wasn't particularly familiar with Glenbrook. This was despite the fact that he lived nearby. The car park where Samuel's car was found was only a 15-minute drive from the town where he lived. Samuel was also seen on CCTV at the park on the 15th. The exact timing hasn't been made public, but news reports state that it was after he last spoke to Ashley in his final text message. Searches of the park revealed no trace of Samuel. There's been no activity on his phone or bank account since he vanished, and no explanation for what might have happened to him. Even as an experienced outdoorsman, it's always possible for accidents to happen. Samuel isn't the first person to have mysteriously disappeared in the park, and it's possible he may have been overlooked in the wilderness. There are many unanswered questions in this strange missing person case. If Samuel was driving for an hour, he didn't go straight from his home to the park. Answering what else he may have been doing that day may help to explain this strange case. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Springwood Police Station of Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. The mysterious disappearance of David Lidgey began on June 29, 2011, in Norfolk, when he and his wife Shona, both doctors, had an argument that was resolved by the time David took the children to school. He sent his wife a text saying that he didn't feel well and was going to stay home from work. The day of the disappearance, his neighbor spotted him returning home from his children's school. He left Shona a note saying that he had gone for a walk. It wasn't unusual for him to go hiking in the countryside, so the note didn't seem strange. Shona discovered David's phone, wallet, and watch had been left behind. He had taken his house keys, a rucksack, and a sleeping bag. When David didn't return home, he was reported as a missing person. Case detectives searched the place, and missing person posters were put up in surrounding areas, including London and Leicester, where he once studied. In Leicester, there were sightings of a man matching David's description attending football matches, but they couldn't be confirmed to be the same missing people. Investigators learned that David had once asked a friend to be their reference for a job in Australia. When the friend had asked if the family was moving with him to Australia, he said he had to choose between his sanity and his family. Police learned he hadn't gotten a visa to move to Australia, and were not sure if this was a true story. A new twist in this already strange missing person case came in 2018, when Shona received creepy text messages. The first was to an ex-directory line and read, quote, "I've been away for a while. I'm coming home on a plane. Should be with you soon. Please have a newspaper for me." When Shauna responded, the person insisted they were David and said he'd been to India and Australia. David's son also received the same creepy text messages by someone claiming to be their father. Shauna couldn't be sure if this was a true story, but it seemed to have David's tone of voice, and only he would know their phone numbers. Police were able to trace the number no further than London. The text messages stopped after police began searching for the individual, and David was never found. The strange disappearance of David Lidgey is an extremely strange missing person case which has remained unsolved for more than a decade. David left behind a wife and 3 children who have spent the last 11 years wondering what happened to their loved one. The last time anybody heard from Jaimie Springer was in the form of a normal text message to her boyfriend, a text message with a creepy backstory. At about 8 p.m. on August 31st, 2016, she sent a text to say that she would be home in about an hour. It wasn't until a few days later that Jaimie was reported as a missing person. Jaimie lived what her friend called an odd life. She had a few run-ins with the law, including one just a few months before she vanished without a trace. On that occasion, she was caught driving a car with someone else's license plates and pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice. In 2015, she and 4 men had been charged with serious offenses, including aggravated assault and kidnapping, but the charges were dropped in November. 10 months later, Jaimie mysteriously vanished without a trace. Jaimie would sometimes disappear for short periods of time. When she didn't come home that night, it took a few days before her family began to worry about where she had gone missing. Jaimie was last seen walking down McLaughlin Drive in Moncton, New Brunswick. There was little information about what she was doing earlier that day, but police started their investigation there. After appeals for information in this missing person case, police received a number of tips. Some claimed Jaimie was still alive, while others stated the missing person had passed away and would never be found again. Police kept most details about the case hidden from the public so that they could better tell who was telling the truth during interviews. However, they did reveal foul play was most likely involved in this mysterious disappearance. In 2019, there were news reports that information had just been passed to the police, and it looked like there might be a break in the case. But since then, Jaimie's missing person case has gone cold. A $12,000 reward has been offered for anybody who can help get this unsolved case solved. The money was raised by Jaimie's family and the Crime Stoppers charity. Anyone with information should contact Crime Stoppers. Adrien Lukas disappeared without a trace after sending some dark and disturbing text messages to his parents. Adrien was apparently scared for his life and in a foreign country when he sent 2 scary text messages to his father. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. It was the summer of 2017 when a friend told Adrien about a construction job in Austria that was looking for extra workers. Adrien lived with his parents in Germany, but was in need of money, so he agreed to take the job. He was put up in a hotel room near the construction site and would go missing shortly thereafter. He arrived on September 20th. 3 days later, while talking on the phone with his father, Adrien said 3 of his coworkers had spoken badly about him. He didn't feel safe, and Richard got the impression it was a serious issue. He suggested Adrien talk to his boss, but he never did. The following Monday, Adrien's coworkers noted he was acting strangely. He said he had a stomach ache and was given permission to go to the hotel to rest. Instead, he went to a porta potty and tried to call his father and then his sister, leaving a voicemail to his sister in German, saying, quote, "Here's Adrien. There are men here that want to kill me. Please tell Dad I can't reach him." He then frantically sent scary text messages to his father in Polish. The creepy text messages read, quote, "Dad, I don't know if I will survive today. If I don't notify you in an hour, it's the end. My last wish is to be buried next to Grandma and Grandpa." Adrien's father didn't see the scary text messages until the following day. He couldn't get in contact with Adrien and went to his boss instead. Adrien's boss said that he hadn't seen the missing person since the day before. Adrien had stayed in the porta potty for 45 minutes before he was seen leaving the construction site. His coworkers had assumed he'd gone back to the hotel, but then they discovered Adrien's jacket with the hotel key at the construction site. After getting into the hotel room, it was obvious Adrien hadn't stayed there for a few days. The only things missing from the hotel room were Adrien and his 2 phones. The police were informed of the missing person case. Search dogs tracked Adrien's scent to a bus stop, but his final destination is unknown. He'd suffered with mental health problems in the past, and it's possible the things he was writing about in the text messages weren't actually real. No clues as to Adrien's whereabouts have been found, and his case remains unsolved. The scary but true story behind Daniel Reeves' missing person case started with a simple text message to his girlfriend. Under normal circumstances, the "I love you" text would have been perfectly ordinary, but it's creepy considering the backstory behind his strange disappearance. The final time anybody saw Daniel before he disappeared was on May 3rd, 2008. The night of the disappearance, Daniel was at the house with his girlfriend, Sarah, in Madison, Illinois. They were watching TV together when Sarah fell asleep sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. When she woke up at 4 a.m., Daniel was gone. Sarah checked her phone around this time and found the creepy final text from Daniel. When she tried to call him, he wouldn't answer and was reported as a missing person by his family the following day after he didn't return home from Sarah's house. Although less than 24 hours had passed between the disappearance and the report, Daniel was never found again. It was almost a week later when Daniel's car was found, one door open on a residential street 6 miles from Sarah's home. Inside, Daniel's missing wallet, ID, and credit cards were found. His phone and car keys were both still missing. There was no sign of foul play around the car and no crime scene clues that would lead investigators to Daniel. When police asked around about the car, people remembered seeing it there since 11 p.m. of May 3rd, which was the night that he disappeared. None of Daniel's family or friends know any reason why he would have been on that particular street. He had no known acquaintances there. The street wasn't far from Clifty Falls State Park. Daniel would sometimes go hiking there during the day, but obviously not at such a late hour. According to family and friends, he had a good life, and even though he suffered from social anxiety, he had no reason to take his own life. His family believed Daniel met with foul play the night that he vanished, and are still searching for answers. One of the strangest missing person cases on FBI files is the unsolved disappearance of Koy Vu. Koy vanished without a trace in April of 2007, leaving behind all of his belongings and a family with unanswered questions. Koy was 25 years old when he disappeared, but a developmental disability meant that he had the mental age of a child. He was also born deaf and had limited sign language abilities, but could read and write fluently and usually communicated through notes. At the time of his disappearance, he was living with his parents, sister, and brother-in-law in their Vancouver, Washington home. April 7th would be Koy's mother's birthday, and the whole family were looking forward to the celebration. He had plans to visit Seattle and visit Koy's brother. Koy in particular was excited, and had already bought a gift for his mother, which was discovered wrapped up and left in his room after he vanished. The night before the trip, Koy was watching TV with his mother. Between midnight and 1 a.m. on April 7th, he apparently decided to turn in for the night. He signed goodnight to his mother and went upstairs. His brother-in-law saw him head into his room. 7 hours later at 8 a.m., his sister and brother-in-law went to wake Koy up so that they could leave, but Koy wasn't in his room. His bed didn't look like it had been slept in, but the clothes that Koy had been wearing the day before were found. A different outfit was missing, though. A search of the house proved Koy was missing. It seemed like Koy had gone up to his room, gotten changed, then left the house. This was very out of character. When he did leave the house, it was usually only for a couple of hours, and he had never left in the middle of the night before. His jacket was also found in his room, and his bike was in the garage. Even if Koy had decided for some reason to go for a stroll at night, The weather that night had been particularly bad, and none of it made sense. A search of the nearby area turned up nothing, and soon Koy's disappearance was being reported on the local news. The day after Koy was last seen, a woman contacted police to say that she had seen a man matching Koy's description near a local school. He had played basketball with her sons, hadn't spoken, but had indicated that he needed help. When she had offered him a bottle of water, he had drunk the whole bottle. The sighting was never confirmed, but police followed up the lead. Dogs found traces of Koy's scent in the area, but there was no trail to follow. It wasn't long before the case went cold. The FBI became involved with the case as it was believed he may have possibly been in a neighboring state. But the FBI agents also made little progress. At first, it was thought that Koy had vanished by himself. Even though it didn't make sense for him to leave the house alone in the middle of the night, investigators figured he had done just that and would be found hiding nearby. He may have also succumbed to the elements given that it was wet and chilly, and he didn't have a jacket. But as time passed by and the case went cold, investigators believed that Koy had met with foul play. Today, Koy's case remains unsolved. There are multiple theories about what could have happened to the young man, but little in the way of evidence and less answers. He was 5'5" when he vanished and weighed 105 pounds. He had black hair, brown eyes, and a slightly deformed right hand, according to the FBI. Information on this case should be passed to the local FBI office or Clark County Sheriff's Office at 877-274-6311. FBI agents have been left puzzled by a disappearance that occurred more than 15 years ago. Karen Adams vanished after leaving a casino at just after 3 a.m. on March 12, 2007. Both her and her car have never been seen again. Karen was 54 years old at the time of her disappearance. She held down 2 jobs, one as a teaching aide at a school for disabled students, and another as a cashier. She lived in Pennsylvania with her brother and her dog, who she cherished. According to her brother, she had somewhat of a gambling problem, but it didn't seem to be something that impacted her day-to-day life. She just saw it as her favorite pastime. On the evening of March 11th, Karen took her red 2005 Suzuki Forenza and headed to the Mountaineer Gaming Resort, a casino in Northwest Virginia. Despite being in another state, it would have been around a 45-minute drive. Karen headed to the bingo hall, her favorite game. There hasn't been any information about her luck at the casino that day, if she won big or if it was just an average day for her. At about 11 p.m., she went to the gaming side of the casino, which housed the slot machines. Karen remained at the casino until just after 3 a.m. CCTV spotted her getting into her car in the parking lot and driving away. According to one source, a few minutes later she checked her voicemail. She wouldn't access her phone again after that. Local police began investigating the case right away. Given Karen would have crossed state lines if she made it home, her case also became an FBI file. Over the years, police have followed up on numerous tips, but they have all led nowhere. There has been little progress in the case over the years, and it quickly went cold. There has been no activity on Karen's phone or bank accounts. Her car has also not been spotted on any cameras since leaving the casino. Her journey home would have taken her alongside the Ohio River and across a small lake. Investigators looked into whether her or her car might have ended up in the water, and multiple dive teams have been sent into the river to search for the missing people. There have been many cars found, but none matched Karen's. The local cold case unit has continued to work on Karen's case, but for now it remains unsolved. On the 15th anniversary of her disappearance, there was another appeal for information, and they urged anyone who could help solve the case to contact the FBI's Pittsburgh office at 412-432-4000, or the Beaver County Crime Solvers at 724-774-2000. The FBI is investigating the unexplained disappearance of Robert Garrett Stewart Jr. in 2013. This case began in the early hours of October 4th, 2013. Garrett had been in Billings, Montana with friends. The friends watched him walk away, and according to some sources, he was disoriented. Whether this was due to alcohol or some other reason has not been stated. Garrett was an enrolled member of the Crow tribe and lived on the Crow reservation with his family. It's assumed Garrett had been heading back there, though it would have been a considerably long journey on foot. He likely would have tried to get a lift, if that was his intended destination. Garrett never made it home, and 6 days after he was last seen, his family contacted authorities. The FBI soon became involved. Many tips were sent in to try to help solve the case, but none worked out. Soon, investigators began to suspect that Garrett had met with foul play. Now they believe that someone in the community knows what happened to Garrett. It seems like the right piece of information from the right person could help police solve the case. So far, that information hasn't been uncovered. Garrett's family have continued to push for answers, but were struck by another tragedy in 2019. One of Garrett's cousins, Hub Williamson, disappeared without a trace on April 9th. He'd been traveling to his mother's house and was last spotted on CCTV at a gas station getting fuel. He never made it back to his mother's home. Authorities don't believe the two cases are related, but both remain unsolved. Garrett is described as being 5'11" and 6 foot when he vanished, and weighing between 130 and 150 pounds. He had recently shaved his head, but was growing a mustache and a goatee. He was wearing a gray zip-up sweatshirt, faded blue jeans, and a Western sugar beet baseball hat when he was last seen. There's a reward of $10,000 for information that can help solve the case. The FBI office investigating the case can be contacted at 406-248-8487. For almost 5 years, the FBI file of Abby Lynn Patterson has remained open and unsolved. She vanished in September of 2017 after telling her mother that she was going to meet up with a friend from high school. The disappearance took place in the town of Lumberton, North Carolina, where locals fear a serial killer may have been preying on young women at the time that Abby vanished. Abby was at a vulnerable point in her life in 2017. She had suffered from an addiction to illegal substances and was treated at a rehab center. After leaving rehab, she had moved back to Lumberton, where she had lived 3 years previously and where her mother still resided. She had only been back for a few days when she vanished on September 5th, 2017. According to her mother, she left the house at about 11:30 a.m. She said she would be gone in an hour and was going to meet up with a friend. A witness claimed they saw Abby getting into a brown Buick. She seemed to know the driver and wasn't forced inside. An hour passed and there was no sign of Abby. Her mother called her to see when she would be back, but her phone went straight to voicemail. This was very much unlike Abby. Even when Abby had been using illegal substances, she kept in contact with her mother. Later that day, Abby was reported missing. The driver of the car was found and interviewed by investigators, and he claimed he had been an acquaintance of Abby's and that he had dropped her off at another location, but this location was never made public. Little other information on Abby's case has been uncovered. Around the time that she vanished, the bodies of 3 women were discovered. The cause for their passing was unable to be determined, but all 3 had substance abuse problems. There had been a number of other people going missing from the area, leading to some speculation that all the disappearances may be connected. According to authorities, there wasn't enough information to connect Abby's disappearance to the other women, but so far nothing can be ruled out. Abby was 5'7" and weighed 140 pounds when she vanished. She had a tattoo of birds on her shoulder and was last seen wearing brown shorts and a white shirt. Anyone with information on the case should contact the FBI's Charlotte Field Office at 704-762-6100. Some of the toughest FBI cases to solve are those of American citizens who disappear abroad. The complex bureaucracy involved only adds to the typical difficulties of trying to solve an unsolved disappearance. The disappearance of Bob Ellert is an unusual example of this challenge. Bob was a 71-year-old man who vanished in Panama City in 2013. Bob had been living in Panama for about 10 years. After retiring, he had bought a condo in Panama City and split his time between living in the Central American country and his farm in Harris, Minnesota. His other love was sailing. He dreamed of sailing around the world one day and had a boat harbored in the Shelter Bay Marina. In June of 2013, two friends had come to visit and stay with him in the condo. Neither noticed anything out of the ordinary in the lead up to his disappearance. On June 21st, the friends came back from an outing to find that the condo was empty. Nothing was out of place, but Bob was absent. They found a note, apparently written by Bob, saying he was going to Bocas del Toro with Diane to check out some real estate and he'd be gone for a couple of weeks. Bob had previously expressed interest in buying land in South America that he could farm, so the note didn't seem too strange. Neither of them had ever heard of Diane, but it didn't seem like they were especially close friends to Bob. It was possible he had acquaintances that they didn't know about. Later on, they started to think about the note some more. They contacted Bob's daughter, Mariah, to see if she knew of Diane. Diane was a mystery to Mariah too. She also hadn't heard from her father since the 21st. Bob usually kept in touch with his family in the US via calls or emails, but nobody had received any communications from him since the day he was last seen. Mariah began to contact authorities in the US, and a search for Bob began. When Bob's family saw the note, they realized that the handwriting wasn't his. His boat was also still docked at the marina. This didn't necessarily mean that he hadn't gone to Bocas del Toro, as sailing from the marina to the Caribbean islands would have been a long journey, and would have been more likely that he took the ferry if Bob had actually made the journey. However, Bob's car is still missing and hasn't been found. Today, this FBI case remains unsolved but open, and authorities from the US and Panama continue to work to try to crack the case. Before her disappearance, 33-year-old Ranelle Rose Bennett was described as a kind and caring woman who looked out for her family and her children. In June of 2021, Ranelle's children were living with her mother in Hogback, New Mexico, and she made sure to visit them and contact them daily. Little did the family know that Ranelle would soon vanish without a trace under mysterious circumstances. June 15, 2021, was the last time that people saw or heard from Ranelle from before she went missing. On this warm summer day, Ranelle visited her mother, Rose, to see her children, and also to make plans for her daughter's upcoming birthday party. The party was just days away and everyone was excited. As Ranelle was leaving her mother's home, she did something quite bizarre. Rose would later tell the media that Ranelle was crying and hugged her mother for an extended period. This was highly unusual, but Ranelle did not tell her mother what was wrong. Ranelle left her mother's home for what would become the last time. Days later, when Ranelle was missing her own daughter's birthday party, Rose immediately knew something was very wrong. Ranelle was devoted to her children and would never disappear like this without contacting the family. 2 days passed and there was still no sign of Ranelle, which prompted Rose to contact the local police department and report her daughter as a missing person. Unfortunately, the local police failed to act, and according to Rose, it took over a week for an officer to be deployed, and the missing person report to be filed. At this time, the police had missed out on crucial evidence, and Ranelle's family had fought tirelessly for the missing person case to begin. Even when the report was eventually filed, the police did little in the way of investigation, and according to Ranelle's family and friends, it was them who discovered her missing shoes and jumper in North Shiprock, New Mexico. Some pieces of evidence were taken from Ranelle's home. However, investigators have not revealed whether any testing or analysis on these items has ever been carried out. Ranelle's unsolved case was picked up by the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Navajo Nation Police, but since then, there has been little movement. Rose, Ranelle's mother, told the Navajo Times that she waited 3 months to hear from federal agents assigned to her daughter's case, and that she had to constantly chase the special agents for information. Ranelle's friends and family are actively searching for her and have been at the forefront of her unsolved disappearance. Many members of the Navajo Nation community have also rallied behind Ranelle's family, and they vow to never stop investigating until justice is found. In her missing person report, Ranelle Rose Bennett is described as a Native American who was enrolled in the Navajo Nation with black hair, brown eyes, 5'2" and 125 pounds at the time of her mysterious disappearance. She has 2 tattoos, the letter B behind her left ear, and the name Tristan on her right arm. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Bureau of Indian Affairs at 505-563-3600, quoting case number C21000597. 25-year-old Bradley Dale Ross II was described as hardworking and a compassionate young man. Before his strange disappearance, Bradley loved to ride his motorbike and go hunting in the wilderness. Bradley had grown up in northern Michigan and had moved to Fort Wayne, Indiana to look for work and start a new life in his early 20s. By 2004, Bradley and his fiancée were living together in Fort Wayne and were expecting a child when Bradley would mysteriously vanish without a trace, leaving behind one of the most bizarre missing person cases of all time. On November 19th of that year, Bradley's fiancée headed off to work, kissing him goodbye. The two had agreed that Bradley would take her car, a silver 2004 Dodge Stratus, and pick her up from work later that evening. But after work, Bradley was nowhere to be found. At first, she was angry, but as hours passed and he was still missing, she became worried about the person she dearly loved. At 10 p.m. on the night of his disappearance, the Fort Wayne Police Department received reports of a vehicle collision at the intersection of Coliseum Boulevard and State Boulevard. When they arrived at the scene, investigators learned that a silver 2004 Dodge Stratus was the vehicle responsible, but missing was the person driving. After running the license plates, they tracked down the owner, who was the fiancée of Bradley. She informed investigators that he had failed to show up at her workplace earlier that day, and Bradley was officially reported missing. Investigators are unsure whether Bradley was the one driving the car or whether someone else had used it. Witnesses at the scene said that the driver fled the scene of the crime after the collision, leading expert investigators to believe that Bradley may have run away. Bradley's family refuted this theory, telling criminal investigators that Bradley would never leave behind his child or his fiancée, and that it was extremely out of character for him to not be in touch. Multiple searches for Bradley were carried out. However, no sign of the missing person has ever been found. Following Bradley's mysterious disappearance, his fiancée and their child moved to Texas, and some reports indicate that she's been uncooperative in the missing person case. Bradley's family are still desperately searching for him and hope that one day his missing person case can finally be resolved. Bradley Dale Ross II is described as a white male with brown hair, blue eyes, 5'10" and 175 pounds. His left ear is pierced, one of his front teeth is chipped, and he has the following scars or tattoos: a burn scar on his wrist, a surgical scar on the inside of his ankle, and a tribal band tattoo on his right bicep. On the day of his unsolved disappearance, Bradley was seen wearing a small gold hoop earring, a watch with a two-tone band, blue jeans, a black hooded Carhartt winter coat, and hiking boots. Anyone with information on this creepy unsolved mystery is asked to contact Detective Dale Wilson of the Fort Wayne Police Department on 206-427-1201, quoting case number 05F0007309. The disappearance of 33-year-old Gail Knowlton is perhaps one of the most bizarre missing person cases out there. The strangest part about Gail's unsolved disappearance is what happened after she went missing. These mysterious events will shock you. On January 21st, 1992, Gail left her home in Salem Heights, Massachusetts, and began her short journey to work at the Sears Credit Bureau. Unfortunately, Gail never arrived, and somewhere between her home and work, she mysteriously vanished. Gail lived with her husband, Edward Knowlton, who was a paraplegic, and her son. According to an article by the Boston Globe, at the time of her disappearance, Gail was on parole for an undisclosed charge, and investigators are unsure whether this criminal case is connected to her strange disappearance. When Gail failed to show up to work or return home, the Salem Police Department was notified of her disappearance, and the investigation began. The Salem Police Department spoke to neighbors who revealed that they had heard shouting and arguing in the days before Gail's disappearance. They had also noticed a lot of what they called suspicious activity, although a further investigation yielded no evidence. The search for Gail continued, with posters and flyers being circulated around Salem Heights. Then, a few years later, the case took a strange turn when the Salem Police Department was contacted by an unlikely source who claimed they could solve the mystery. Laurie Cabot was a self-described witch and psychic, and she claimed to have a mysterious vision about the day Gail disappeared. According to Laurie, Gail had gotten into a dark-colored truck with an unidentified man who may be a friend of Gail's. Laurie also boldly claimed that whoever took Gail had taken her to Mount Washington in New Hampshire, and that her missing body could be found in the wilderness. Investigators listened to what Laurie had to say. However, there's been no evidence to back up any of these bizarre claims. Gail's husband, Edward, has not been named as a suspect in her unsolved disappearance, most likely due to his paraplegic condition, and investigators have made little progress since she went missing in 1992. Gail Knowlton is described as a white female with brown hair, brown eyes, 5'7" and 110 pounds to 150 pounds at the time of her disappearance. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Massachusetts State Police at 978-754-8908, quoting case number 92-106-0056. In April of 1991, 34-year-old Gordon Cummings, along with his girlfriend, Anastasia Seals, and another couple, Wayne Schwartz and Arlene Burlington, left the US and headed to Santa Rosalia, Mexico for a well-deserved vacation. The group spent their days soaking up the sun and culture in Santa Rosalia, and on April 19th, they headed towards the port of Punta Chevato. Little did any of them know that this trip on the ocean would cost them their lives and result in one of Mexico's strangest missing person cases. On April 19th, the group jumped into a sailboat and headed out into the Sea of Cortez, where they would mysteriously disappear under creepy circumstances. As the afternoon rolled in, so did a storm with strong winds and heavy tides. The group had become trapped in the sea in incredibly harsh conditions. By the next day, the capsized fishing boat was found floating in the sea, along with the bodies of Anastasia and Wayne. But two of the other people were still missing. Port authorities called the police and an investigation was launched. The families of the four people were contacted, and now the race was on to find the remaining two missing people, Gordon and Arlene. Investigators speculated that the two had likely been lost at sea when their boats had capsized, but just days after their disappearance, the police were inundated with sightings of the missing American. According to two fishermen, they had seen Gordon coming out of the water and attempting to get onto a nearby bus. Other sightings of the missing person placed him in the towns of La Paz, Cabo San Lucas, and Colonia Vecin Guerrero. In the town of Colonia Vecin Guerrero, an unknown man matching Gordon's description had been arrested for stealing food. By the time Gordon's parents reached the town, the man had already been released. He disappeared from town before they arrived and was never seen again. There have been hundreds of missing person sightings of Gordon over the years. Many of these witnesses have claimed that Gordon is homeless and gets food wherever or however he can. He stands out in the crowd due to him speaking English and his American accent. Despite hundreds of possible sightings, the missing person has never been found, and his family still believes that he is out there somewhere in Mexico. Gordon Collins is described as a white male with dirty blonde hair, blue eyes, 6'2" and 200 pounds. He has scars on his outer left shoulder. Anyone with information on his bizarre disappearance is asked to contact the U.S. Consulate in Tijuana on 664-977-2000. When Norma Sellers dropped her 22-year-old granddaughter, Heather Sellers, off at the Waffle House in Spartanburg, South Carolina, she had no idea that she would become a missing person case. Heather's bizarre unsolved disappearance has continued to haunt investigators, and there's a suspect in her mysterious case, a suspect who is extremely close to Heather and her family. On September 24, 2002, Norma dropped her granddaughter off at Waffle House for her shift as normal. Heather got out of her car, grabbed her bag, and said goodbye to her grandmother. After finishing up her shift, Heather grabbed the spare set of clothes from her bag and met up with her boyfriend, Jonathan Christian Vick. The two had been engaged in the past, but the engagement had been called off. There were accusations of mistreatment towards Heather, and she had told her family that Jonathan was often cruel. For unknown reasons, Heather refused to report his mistreatment to the police, and shortly after, the two were back together. According to reports, after meeting at the Waffle House, Heather and Jonathan visited 2 bars before ending the night and going their separate ways. Heather went missing when the following morning came, and she was nowhere to be found at her home. She had not collected her paycheck from work, which was extremely out of character for her. Her family found these events to be strange and reported her disappearance to the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office. Unfortunately, no sign of Heather has ever been found, and the key suspect in Heather's unsolved case is none other than her boyfriend, Jonathan Vick. In 2005, just 3 years after Heather disappeared, Jonathan was charged in the 1995 cold case of Dana Satterfield. For his crimes, Jonathan was sentenced to life in prison, and so far they've been unable to find any evidence that connects him to the mysterious disappearance of Heather. Heather's family has not given up hope that one day her case will be solved and justice will be served. In her missing person report, Heather Sellers is described as a white female with blonde or strawberry blonde hair, blue eyes, 5'1" to 5'3", and 100 to 110 pounds when she disappeared. Heather has a mole on her cheek and an unspecified tattoo on her arm. She was last seen wearing a beige tank top with blue stripes and blue jeans. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Spartanburg Sheriff's Office at 864-503-4509, quoting case number 021-002-140. 45-year-old Barbara Rushton resided at her home on Old Forest Road in Birmingham, Alabama, with her husband and daughter. The Rushton family appeared happy on the outside, but deep down, a scary story was brewing. On the evening of August 29, 1984, 19-year-old Eleanor noticed her mother was acting weird. Barbara was crying and had a vacant expression after arguing with her husband, at which point she told her husband and daughter that she was going to a friend's house to play bridge. No one knows what happened to her after she left her home on Old Forest Road in her white 1980 Volkswagen Rabbit. She was never to be found by her family again. By the next day, Eleanor contacted her mother's bridge club and learned Barbara was absent that night from the people she played bridge with. Whether this was her real destination or not remains unknown. A missing person case was soon opened by the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, where investigators learned that Barbara had type 1 diabetes and depended on 2 insulin shots a day. She didn't take any insulin with her when she mysteriously disappeared that night, and Eleanor has since postulated that her mother's bizarre behavior may be linked to spiking insulin levels. According to the teenager, on the day her mother went missing, she spent 15 minutes looking for her car keys and suddenly found she'd been holding them all along. Barbara's strange behavior in the lead up to her unsolved disappearance had worried her family deeply. Very few investigative leads came in, and to this day, Barbara's missing person case remains one of the strangest mysteries to investigators, who still want to see the case solved. Her car has never been found, and her bank accounts showed no activity since. Barbara Rushton is described as a white female with blonde or strawberry blonde hair, blue eyes, 5'6" and 130 to 140 pounds. She wears glasses, contact lenses, and her ears are pierced. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Jeannie Miller of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department at 205-325-1250, quoting case number 830-829-22. 23-year-old Bernadette Stevenson Caruso of Dundalk, Maryland, was described as a kind and loving young woman who was devoted to her daughter, Nicole. By 1986, the marriage between Bernadette and her estranged husband, Paul, had completely broken down, and the two were in the middle of divorce proceedings and custody hearings. They had a court case set for October of 1986, and 2 weeks after, Bernadette mysteriously disappeared. Bernadette had accused Paul of getting physical with her on several occasions, and he had lost his job at the Baltimore County Police Department for mistreating a prisoner. On September 27, 1986, Bernadette finished up her shift at the Shaw's Jewelry Store in the East Point Mall and hopped into her car, a gray-green 1982 Chevrolet Cavalier that her grandmother had let her borrow. After that, Bernadette went missing, and neither she nor her grandmother's car have ever been found. When Bernadette failed to collect her daughter from relatives, a report was filed with the Baltimore County Police Department, and the search for Bernadette began. Bernadette's coworkers told investigators that on the day of her disappearance, she had received an unusual call from Paul, asking her to discuss something urgent in person. Police investigators have never released any further information about this possible meeting. Despite wide-scale searches, no sign of Bernadette has ever been found, and her family are now fundraising to purchase sonar equipment so that they can search the waters for her possible missing body. Investigators believe that Bernadette met with foul play, but without enough evidence to bring about a criminal conviction, her family continues to keep her name in the media and hopes that one day her case will be solved. Bernadette Stevenson Caruso is described as a white female with brown hair, green eyes, 5'4" and 190 pounds. She has a mole on her left cheek and her ears are pierced. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Baltimore County Police Department at 410-887-2214, quoting case number 11E934538. In August of 1986, 53-year-old A.W. Steed received a customary call from his bank to let him know that he was $9,500 overdrawn. When A.W. looked into the matter further, he discovered that a check supposedly signed by him had been cashed at a bank in Emory, Texas. A.W. ensured the bank that he had no idea about the check, and the bank was unable to solve the mystery. Just weeks later, A.W. would disappear under highly mysterious circumstances, and to this day, his missing person case remains unsolved. After being notified about the check, A.W. discovered that his wife, Carolyn, had accrued a large gambling debt. Both A.W. and Carolyn were big gamblers, and shortly before he disappeared, he confided in his wife that he was in a huge amount of debt as well, bigger than he ever had been before. On August 30th, 1986, A.W.'s ex-wife, Magdalene, received a sudden call from Carolyn about a weekend change of plans. Instead of meeting up with the rest of the family at Lake Fork, she and A.W. had decided to stay at home and would go the next morning. If the story Carolyn told crime investigators was true, then she and her husband left their Sulphur Springs, Texas home for the Veterans of Foreign Wars post. In Carolyn's version of events, the two left the bar at around midnight, and when they arrived home, they got into an argument because A.W. had wanted to gamble. Carolyn saw her husband for the last time before he would become a missing person at around 1 a.m., when he left their Woodcrest Drive home on foot, leaving his beloved trucks behind. Ever since then, AW has remained absent from his family. It's fair to say that the romance had gone missing from the couple's relationship well before his mysterious disappearance. Carolyn had allegedly been cheating on AW with another man, and AW wanted to work to fix their relationship. After his disappearance, the business that AW ran with other members of his family was found in disarray, and his son Gary would later tell investigators that there was oil poured perfectly across parts of the floor, and that other parts had been freshly shampooed. Unfortunately, no crime evidence was obtained from the shop, and to this day, AW remains an unsolved missing person case. A.W. Steed is described as a white male with brown hair, hazel eyes, 5'8" and 140 pounds. He wears a set of full dentures. However, his dental records are not available. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Texas Department of Public Safety at 512-424-5074, quoting case number M891-0003. In 1968, Ilonka Cann married Charles Cann II, and soon after their marriage, the couple welcomed their son into the world. Ilonka went by the name Tootsie and was a devoted stay-at-home mother, while Charles worked at the nearby Berwick Junior School. On May 25, 1970, Ilonka would disappear without a trace in Huntington Mills, Pennsylvania. That morning, Ilonka tended to their children while Charles got ready for work. At 7:20 a.m., Charles left the home, kissing his wife goodbye for what would be the last time before she completely vanished, never to be found. When the school day was done, Charles arrived home at 3:30 p.m., expecting his wife and son to greet him at the door. Instead, as Charles pulled up in his driveway, an eerie feeling washed over him. Inside, he repeatedly called out for his wife's name, but his calls went unanswered. Charles found his son alone. Ilonka was missing. Bizarrely, Charles did not report his wife missing until May 26th of 1970, and the Pennsylvania State Police quickly became involved in Ilonka's case. Multiple searches of the area around her home were conducted, but no evidence to explain the mysterious disappearance of Ilonka has ever been found. In 2022, the Pennsylvania State Police searched a pond close to Ilonka's home, but no body or other evidence was recovered from the body of water. Just a year after she disappeared, Grace P. Brown moved into the home that Ilonka and Charles had shared, and within months, Grace became known as Grace Cann. The couple eventually split up, and there was contention surrounding their marital and relationship status. Ilonka Cann's family continues to fight hard to get the mystery behind their missing loved ones solved. In her missing person report, she's described as a white female with blonde hair, blue eyes, 5'6" and 122 to 130 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Edward Urban of the Pennsylvania State Police Troopers at 570-821-4110. Quoting case number M648707699. In 1986, 27-year-old Carrie Bray suddenly and mysteriously disappeared from the Lake Crest Development Center in Orem, Utah, a home for the disabled. Reports don't specify how long he had been living at Lake Crest as an orphan, but before he simply walked off one day, several employees remembered the man telling them for the longest time that he wanted to go to Texas to become a cowboy. After Carrie went missing, his adoptive sister, Laurie, hung missing person posters up in every town she traveled to. Utah detectives did their best to investigate Carrie's unsolved case, but he had walked away with only the clothes on his back, and they didn't expect that he would make it far. Knowing he had wanted to become a cowboy, they'd sometimes check in with Texas authorities, particularly whenever there was a new John Doe case down south. Ultimately, it was the power of the simple Google search that solved a decades-old mystery. In 2007, in southern Texas, there was a tractor mishap at a ranch. Driving the tractor was a middle-aged farmhand and cowboy named Carrie Bray. When Carrie crashed the tractor, it kicked off an insurance investigation, that would finally solve the mystery years later. When the adjuster Googled his name, his photo and missing persons profile was one of the first results. The insurance adjuster called the police department in Utah, and working with officials in Texas, they were able to confirm this was the unsolved case of Carrie Bray. In a strange but true story, he really had gone off to become a cowboy rancher. After years of his adoptive sister fearing for his life, the missing person case was resolved with an unexpected happy ending. The disappearance of Gina Joe Riff is one shrouded in mystery. The person she was last known to be with said she'd moved to Florida, but what actually happened to this 56-year-old mother is likely much more disturbing. Gina lived in Bibb County, Georgia, with her teacup Yorkie dog Zoe. She had 3 adult children who she kept in contact with, though they didn't live with her. The last contact anybody had with Gina was on the 28th of July, 2024. She told family members she was with a man named Tim Crow in Macomb. According to the messages, Crow was upset and taking that out on her. Contact with Gina suddenly stopped, but this wasn't immediately alarming for the family. Days of silence from Gina turned into weeks, and it began to become obvious that something was wrong. Gina's family and friends couldn't get in touch with her, and they would report her missing to the police almost a month later. In the meantime, people had seen Gina's car being driven around Macomb. The person driving the car was Tim Crow. Gina had sold him her car before moving to Florida. It seemed out of character for her, and exactly how she knew Crow is a mystery. Crow would have been an obvious first place to start in the investigation into Gina's disappearance, but by the time she was reported missing, this would no longer be an option. On August 8th, just under 2 weeks after Gina disappeared, a body was discovered in the neighboring county. A Crawford County Roads Department employee found the body of a young woman on the side of a rural road. She was soon identified as 35-year-old Callie Brooke Goolsby. Only a few days later, warrants were issued for the arrest of Tim Crow in relation to the case. According to Callie's friends, she'd been acting strangely in the weeks before her life was taken. She was scared, and 2 weeks before the incident, she was seen with a black eye. Crow was the prime suspect in this case, and the police caught up with him on August 21st. A standoff took place, and Crow lost his life. He took to his grave any information about what actually happened to Callie Goolsby, and possibly what happened to Gina. It isn't known if Gina had any connection to Callie, other than the fact that they both knew Crow. Unfortunately, even details like how Gina knew Crow are a mystery. It seems that whatever happened to Callie, it happened after Gina's disappearance. The exact timelines are unclear, but it seems Callie's friends noticed a change in her behavior around the time that Gina vanished without a trace. Unfortunately, few new clues in Gina's case have been uncovered. Her last known location is in Macomb, but the exact area of the city is a mystery. This, along with the time that passed before she was reported as a missing person, makes it hard for things like CCTV analysis to take place. It's not even known exactly what she was wearing at the time of her disappearance. One thing that is known is that her dog Zoe is also missing. According to family and friends, it's likely Zoe was traveling with Gina when she vanished. Gina's described as being 5'1" and weighing 135 pounds. She has blue eyes and brown shoulder-length hair. Anyone with information on this missing person case can contact the Bibb County Sheriff's Office at 478-751-7500. Wade Robison disappeared without a trace under strange circumstances 8 months ago. Friends and family are still conducting regular searches of the area where he went missing to try to get to the bottom of what happened to him and bring him home. Wade was 22 years old when he vanished in April of 2024. According to family members, he was a hard worker. The morning of April 21st, 2024 started like any other for him. Even though it was a Sunday, he was up early to go to a job mowing lawns. At about 6:30 a.m., he was driving his purple Pontiac GTO down Highway 80 towards Forney, Texas. Near FM 460, he lost control of the car and spun. The car made contact with the sidewall and pushed a concrete pillar out of the way. The incident was described as a minor single-car accident. There was no one else involved. Wade was able to get out of the vehicle by himself and called his brother-in-law and a friend that he worked with. Wade hadn't missed a single day from work in years, and it seemed as though he wouldn't even use the car accident as a reason to not turn up, as he asked his friend for a lift. They arranged to meet at a nearby business, and Wade hung up. It was the last time anybody would hear from him. Wade's friends arrived at the meeting place to pick Wade up, but there was no sign of him. His car was still at the side of the road, but he wasn't there. This was very out of character for Wade, and the search to find him began almost immediately. At the crash site, there was no evidence of any serious wounds, but it's possible he suffered in some way that didn't leave behind any evidence. He may have been disoriented or suffering from something internal. It was discovered that Wade left the scene of the crash on foot. Early news reports stated he fled the scene, but there was no evidence he was running from anything, and may simply have been going to the meeting spot. The search teams found footprints which led through a nearby construction area, down a side road, and to the muddy banks of a creek. By this point, he was barefoot. If his shoes had been found, this wouldn't have been reported in the media. After days of searching along the banks, Wade's cell phone was discovered. There was no sign of Wade himself, but it was further evidence that he had come in this direction. Unfortunately, this was the last clue that was uncovered in the case. The official search included the use of drones and sniffer dogs to try to find the missing man. Wade vanished in a densely wooded area, which would make it difficult to find him if he became lost. There are also quite a few bodies of water. If Wade was disoriented after the car accident, he may have slipped and fallen into any of these. Early underwater searches were postponed until water levels could become more manageable, but would eventually take place. But so far, nothing has been found. Anyone with information on this missing person case can contact the Forney Police Department at 972-552-6625. Denise Leary was reported missing after her family discovered she wasn't at home, despite her bedroom door being locked shut from the inside. It was October 1st, 2024, when Denise was reported as a missing person to the police, but she was last seen 2 days earlier. The 59-year-old lived in New Haven, Connecticut with her parents and son. They were helping to look after Denise's parents, as her mother had been suffering from health problems for a while. As well as care for relatives, Denise's mother was also regularly visited by a nurse. It was during one of these visits that the family realized Denise was missing. On the morning of September 30th, Denise's son knocked on her bedroom door to speak with her, but got no response. He didn't think anything was wrong, but then the nurse arrived. Denise would normally go out to greet the nurse and check in with the healthcare professional, but this time Denise didn't leave the bedroom. Her family began to worry, especially when they realized the door was still locked from the inside. They thought she may have had some kind of medical emergency and called paramedics to break down the door. But the paramedics only found an empty room and an open window. There was evidence someone had climbed out of the window, including footprints in the dirt outside. Denise had decided to flee from the house this way, but her family had no idea why. She still had her phone at this point, and it pinged in Westport, Connecticut. 30 minutes later, it was tracked to a park in New Haven. Her family members went to both locations but found no sign of her. A few days later, Denise's phone was found behind a neighbor's house. According to her son, Denise had been acting a little strange before she disappeared. She didn't have a boyfriend, but her son suspected she might have been seeing someone. A few days before she vanished, she had asked him to turn off the location on her phone before she went out. Someone had picked her up in a car, and the son had tried to see who it was but didn't get a good look at the individual. Denise had returned from the trip, but it still struck her son as odd. Denise's family searched around the local neighborhood, knocked on doors, and investigated an empty abandoned house. Denise's makeup palette had been found outside the house, but there was nobody inside. Not long after Denise vanished, a family friend reported seeing her outside a shop in Hamden. According to the friend, she didn't appear to be in any distress. The police haven't been able to confirm whether this was actually Denise or not, and are looking at CCTV footage from the area. Foul play isn't suspected in this case, but it's still possible someone else was involved in her disappearance. Anyone with information on this case can contact the New Haven Police at 203-946-6316. Howard Stone was described by his son as an avid hiker and someone who was always up for an adventure. He was on one such adventure when he vanished without a trace in August and hasn't been seen since. Howard was a 64-year-old father and grandfather who didn't let his age slow him down. Just a few weeks before he went missing, he'd been out hiking with his son, and the trip had gone off without any problems. So when he told his son he intended to do some hiking on August 10th, 2024, there didn't seem to be anything to worry about. Howard intended to go golfing and then hike in Little Wild Horse Canyon, just outside of Goblin Valley State Park in Utah. The trail in question would take Howard through a slot canyon. As the name would suggest, these are long, narrow canyons that are often susceptible to flash flooding. It would have been late in the day when Howard started his hike. At around 3 p.m., his son sent a text that received no response. The following morning, there was still no answer from Howard. His son contacted his siblings and confirmed that no one else had seen or heard from him, and he was then reported missing. Howard's car was found parked at the Little Wild Horse trailhead, seeming to confirm that he had at least started his hike. Immediately, a massive search and rescue operation focused on the trail. Specially trained canines were sent out, as well as people on ATVs. The search effort also received support from teams in planes and helicopters searching from above. The nature of the canyons would have made it difficult to spot Howard, even from above, but he might have gone off the trail at some point. Unfortunately, early on in the search, flash flooding hit the area. The trails were closed off to the public, and the search had to be paused for the safety of the search team. When the monsoon-like rains passed, the search resumed. The family held on to hope that Howard might have survived this ordeal so far, and issued a reward of $10,000 if anyone could bring them their missing family member. But as time went on, it seemed more and more likely that he was no longer alive. Underwater teams were sent to search the rivers in the area, and the search area was widened. Those who knew Howard could think of no reason why he would go off trail. As an experienced hiker, he would have known the dangers involved in doing this. But if he'd hurt himself on the hike, and he was trying to get out of the sun, it's possible he might have left the path. Whatever the reason, the places where it was possible to go off trail were also searched. No sign of Howard would turn up. None of his clothing or any of the items he brought with him have ever been found. Howard was 6 feet tall and weighed 180 pounds. He had white hair and blue eyes. Anyone with information can contact Emery County Sheriff's Office at 435-381-2112. Caitlyn Angel Vara started 2024 by taking steps to improve her life. But in August, that progress came to an abrupt stop when she suddenly vanished without a trace. She hasn't been seen or heard from since. Caitlyn was known as Kate to her friends and family. She was very outgoing and had a lot of friends and people who cared about her. Among those was her 4-year-old son, James. On the morning of August 6th, Kate left her home in San Antonio, Texas, to go to a medical appointment. These were appointments she went to daily, and it was her routine to walk a few blocks between her home and the clinic, and to walk back afterwards. This time, she didn't return. Her grandmother was the first to realize Kate was missing. There'd been a few occasions when Kate had disappeared for a few days at a time, but she always stayed in touch with her family. But this time, nobody could get a hold of her. Things became even more worrying when a few days had passed and there was still no sign of her. Her young son had never gone this long without seeing her, and it was clear that something was wrong. The family was able to determine that Kate had made it to the appointment as she was caught on camera there. Afterwards, she simply walked out of the clinic, never to be seen again. The reason why Kate wasn't answering her phone was soon discovered. Someone else was in possession of the phone. According to this individual, another man had given him the cell phone. This man claimed to have seen Kate on the day that she vanished. He'd picked her up from her appointment. At about 1 a.m. that morning, after she disappeared, he claimed to have dropped her off outside a random house not far from where she lived on the city's west side. According to this man, Kate had left her phone in his car. Instead of trying to return it, he'd given it to someone else. Even without this strange decision, it was unusual for Kate to be dropped off without her phone. Her accidentally leaving it behind was very out of character. The man's story changed multiple times, according to Kate's mother. He also couldn't tell her what Kate was wearing when he had last seen her. Despite this suspicious behavior, the man was not named as a person of interest in Kate's case. Kate's mother has been leading the search to try to get answers as to what happened to her daughter, and caring for her grandson. Kate's 27th birthday passed with no sign of her, and there have been few updates in her missing person case since she went missing. It's possible that foul play was involved in Kate's disappearance. Even though her lifestyle could lead to some unpredictability at times, her family believes this behavior was completely out of the ordinary. They don't believe she's willingly staying away from them or her young son. More than 4 months have passed with no new clues that could lead to answers in this case. Kate's family have raised $3,000 for a reward for information that allows them to bring her home. So far, this reward has gone unclaimed. Anyone with information on this case can contact the San Antonio Missing Person Unit at 210-207-7660. Eric Campbell was out camping alone when he suddenly stopped contacting friends and family. An extensive search immediately got underway, but his case remains unsolved. Eric was last seen at Shelley Creek Campground in Northern California. The site is about a quarter of a mile up Patrick Creek Road from US 199 and is surrounded by rugged terrain. He'd arrived at the camp in the early evening of September 12th and quickly set up for a stay. It isn't known how long he was planning to be camping. This wasn't the first time Eric had been in the area. According to investigators, he was also known to frequent the nearby Diamond Creek area. There were no other people with Eric on his camping trip, but he'd brought with him 2 dogs and a cat to keep him company. He was also in constant contact with friends and family, updating them on his trip. Shortly before he vanished, he told family members that he'd seen a bear with cubs. Of course, any bear can be terrifying when met out in the wilderness, but one with cubs to protect can be even more dangerous. Eric told family members he'd scared the animals off by throwing rocks. This encounter didn't seem to alarm him too much, and he just went back to enjoying the outdoors. Just before 8 p.m. on September 16th, Eric stopped responding to messages. His phone records abruptly cut off at this point, and what happens afterward is a mystery. It wasn't long before Eric's family realized something was wrong and contacted the local authorities to file a missing person report. Eric's camp was found at Shelley Creek Campground. Nothing seemed out of place, and it hadn't been disturbed by animals or other people. Eric's cat and dogs were found at the campsite. It seemed as if Eric had only just left and he'd be back at any moment. The only thing that was out of place was Eric's vehicle, which had the hood open. There may have been some mechanical problem. Eric could have been disturbed in the middle of trying to sort out the issue. He may also have gotten a ride to try to get help, but his family thinks it's unlikely he would have left his pets behind. Eric also left behind his cell phone, keys, driver's license, and cigarettes, which also suggests he didn't plan to be away for long. Another possibility is that the hood was open to try to stop animals from nesting inside. After Eric's disappearance was reported to the authorities, search and rescue teams were sent out to try to find any trace of him. Drones, helicopters, and rescue dogs were all utilized, as well as search teams combing through the area on foot. Some boot prints were found in the riverbed near the camp, but no other signs of Eric were found. Anyone with information in this case can contact the Del Norte County Sheriff's Office at 707-464-4191. Jerica Hamry disappeared in what the police described as suspicious circumstances, despite multiple searches of properties around the area where she last went missing. Jerica's family appears to be no closer to finding out where she is or what happened to her. Jerica was last heard from on June 25th. She was 30 years old when she went missing, living in Lincoln, Nebraska. She was also an avid social media user and posted multiple times a day every day. That all stopped on June 25th, and nothing has been updated since. Jerica also failed to show up for work that day, but it wasn't immediately clear that something was wrong. Her family would soon start to worry, though. Jerica's parents looked after her young children and had been in the process of making arrangements to visit them. Jerica was very proud of her daughters and would never miss an opportunity to see them. She was supposed to visit on June 29th, but suddenly stopped communicating with her family. When the date of that visit came, her parents knew something was wrong and reported her missing to the local police. It was only then that they learned of troubles Jerica had been having where she lived. According to her parents, Jerica had made some bad decisions in the past and hung out with the wrong sorts of people. but she was now on the right track and had a job that she enjoyed. Her friends knew that there were still problems though, and she was having trouble with her roommates, 2 other women and a man. A few days before she went missing, Jerica FaceTimed with a friend, telling them about an incident that had occurred with her roommates. She'd been attacked, and the evidence was clear in the video call. She had bruises and a broken nose, according to Jerica's friend. But she didn't want to press charges against her roommates, and the police didn't follow up with the incident any further. After Jerica went missing, they spoke with all the roommates. None of them have spoken publicly about her disappearance, and it's impossible to know what kind of frame of mind she was in when she was last seen. Even such details as what time of day Jerica was last seen haven't been shared. A few months later, Jerica was reported missing. There seemed to be movement in the case. Lincoln police and state authorities searched a property near Overton, Nebraska. Canine units were used in the search, but since those searches, there's been no new information, and it seems that Jerica wasn't discovered. The police stated that evidence suggested Jerica could have been in Arapahoe, Holdridge, Overton, and Lexington, or the surrounding rural areas. As the investigation wore on, it seemed more and more likely that foul play was involved in Jerica's disappearance. In recent appeals for information, Jerica's family have asked for hunters and those who might be out in rural areas to look out for anything that seems out of the ordinary. They pointed out that even a scrap of fabric might be the clue that helps them find answers in this disturbing missing person case. It's possible that the incident with Jerica's roommates was simply a coincidence, and the explanation may lie somewhere outside the house. Whatever the case, someone knows what happened to Jerica and has the clue that could solve this case. Anyone with information can contact Lincoln Police at 402-441-6000. Michael Frisson was on vacation enjoying himself on the Italian island of Sardinia when he disappeared under suspicious circumstances. The clothing Michael was wearing when he vanished has been recovered, but Michael remains missing. Michael lived in Somerset with his mother, Christina, and younger brother. Christina is originally from Sardinia and still has family out there. For his 25th birthday, Christina paid for her oldest son to travel to the Italian island to celebrate and to spend some time with his grandparents. Towards the end of the trip, Christina received a message from her son. About a week into the vacation, Michael had been contacted by a friend from back home. He'd met a woman named Naomi at the swimming center where he worked, and she had also come out to Sardinia. Michael had asked his grandparents if she could stay with him at their home for a while. Now it was getting towards the end of his trip, and Naomi was planning to stay in Sardinia a while longer. Her father was going to be coming out to join her, but Michael didn't feel comfortable leaving her alone in a foreign country. He was going to delay his return to the UK until Naomi's father had arrived. The two had traveled to Louras in the north of the island, which is much more rural and inhospitable. They planned to go camping and volunteer at a farm in return for food and accommodation. On July 13th, Michael went for a walk and came back acting strange. He was disoriented and seemed to be suffering from heat stroke. Naomi and the farm owner gave Michael some water and sent him to lie down. A little while later, Michael woke up and told them he was going on another walk, and this was the last time he was seen. Michael was soon reported missing, and the official search lasted 2 weeks. They found the t-shirt, shorts, and shoes Michael had been wearing, not far from the spot where he was last seen. All his other belongings, including his phone and passport, had been left behind. The area where Michael went missing isn't the sort of place for a leisurely walk. Michael would have had to go through some thick brush and over difficult terrain. It was through this that Michael's mother searched, even after the official search came to a close. No clues have been found since Michael's clothes were located. It's possible he had some kind of medical emergency while out in the wilderness. It's unclear how confused and disoriented he was when he went for a second walk. But even if he'd recovered, it's possible his heat stroke returned while he was out again. It could also be that he simply fell somewhere in the wilderness and was unable to get back to civilization. But Michael's mother worries that something worse happened to him. She believes it's possible he might have been taken by someone. After the case received publicity in Italy and the UK, the Italian police stepped up the investigation and began to consider the possibility that a crime took place. Both the police and Michael's mother have urged Naomi to get back in touch. It's not believed that she had anything to do with Michael's disappearance, but she might have valuable information that could help uncover what actually happened. Michael's family have set up a fundraiser to raise money to support the investigation. Anyone with information can contact the police on 112 or the state police on 113. The last sign of life anybody received from missing person Austin King was a handwritten note left at the top of Yellowstone's highest mountain. Extensive searches by official and private search teams turned up no trace of the missing backpacker, who hasn't been seen or heard from since September. Austin was 22 years old at the time of his disappearance. He worked in concessions at Yellowstone National Park, and it was within the park's 2 million acres that he would vanish without a trace. On September 14, 2024, Austin was dropped off by boat at Terrace Point, an area on the shore of Yellowstone Lake's southeast arm. The plan was a 7-day solo backpacking trip through a remote region of the park. He would then return to the spot to be picked up by boat on September 20th. The area is mountainous, containing the Absaroka Range. Among that range is Eagle Peak. It lies roughly 6 miles away from the lake and is the tallest mountain in the park. Austin was last spotted on September 16th at a place called Howell Creek. A ranger who talked to Austin while he was on the trip noted that he had changed his plans and was now attempting to scale Eagle Peak. September 20th came, and there was no sign of Austin at the pickup point. A search got underway soon after, with the focus being on the mountains where Austin was last seen. It was discovered that Austin had attempted to phone family and friends on September 17th. A message was left on his father's voicemail, but it was a week before this was discovered and listened to. In the message, he sounded scared. He'd managed to make it to the top of Eagle Peak, but getting back down would be a problem. At the top of the mountain, a logbook was located. Here, Austin had left a message dated to September 17th. The eerie message read, "I can't feel my fingers, and my glasses are so fogged from the ruthless weather of the mountains. I truly cannot believe I'm here after what it took to be here. I endured rain, sleet, hail, and the most wind I've ever felt. I could not see Eagle for most of the day due to the most fog I've ever seen in my life. I free-soloed too many cliffs to get here, and walked up to the peak from the connecting peak, aka not the right path." The message ended on a positive note, stating that he wouldn't forget the experience for the rest of his life, and he urged others to go out and live life. Judging by his tone in the voicemail message, Austin's optimism wouldn't last much longer. It was roughly 6 p.m. by the time he reached the top of the mountain, and it was a little over an hour before sunset. Going down the wrong path from that point would have taken Austin through very dangerous terrain, with steep drops and crumbling cliffs. Rescuers couldn't determine which direction Austin had taken, making the search area extremely wide. About a month after Austin was last seen, snow began to hit the area. The search for the missing man became even more difficult. Eventually, even Austin's family had to stop the searches for the year. They turned their focus to raising money for searches to resume in July of 2025 when snow melts. His father has a small hope that Austin managed to make it to a remote cabin to wait out the winter, but the later searches will likely be a recovery mission rather than a rescue. The disappearance of Calvin Jones is an extremely strange and disturbing missing person case. The father of 3 vanished without a trace in August of 2024, and his case remains unsolved. Calvin was last seen at his work in Cleveland, Ohio, on the night of August 20th, 2024. He'd been working at Giorgio's Pizza for about 10 years, delivering pizza in the Cleveland area. The night that he was last seen didn't appear to be any different to any other. At about 10 p.m., he delivered pizza to his children, who were with Calvin's brother at the time. Calvin was a single father and very close to his children. He was especially close to his middle child, who was just 16 years old when his father vanished. Calvin always kept his son up to date with where he was and what he was doing. It wasn't unusual when Calvin's son called him at 11:30 p.m. that evening. They had a brief conversation, and the son asked about how to put his younger brother to bed. Calvin was seen on CCTV at the pizza shop around the same time. This was the last anybody saw or heard from the 37-year-old. The following day, Calvin's mother was hosting a family get-together. It was to celebrate Calvin's daughter's 18th birthday, and her going off to college at the start of the new term. this wasn't something Calvin would have missed, and he'd actually bought all the food for the celebration. When Calvin didn't show up, his mother first thought that he might have been overwhelmed for some reason. It seemed that there was a lot going on, and the eldest child going off to college can be emotional for some parents. But if Calvin was simply overwhelmed, his family believed he would have called someone and let them know the situation. As this didn't happen, they believed something bad had happened to him. Nobody could get in touch with Calvin, and he was reported as missing shortly after. Calvin was last seen in his car, a 2011 Chevy Impala with a cracked windshield. At first, it seemed like finding the car would lead to Calvin being found, but this lead only caused more confusion. The car was spotted on a flock camera at 11:45 a.m. on August 21st, the day after he was last seen. It was driving west at Broadway near McCracken. Even stranger was camera footage on a doorbell camera near Calvin's home. On that same afternoon, Calvin's car was driven up to his house and stopped on the street outside. The car waited there for 50 seconds before the driver pulled away again. This took place after Calvin's missing person report had already been filed, and he would have known his family was worried about him. It's believed that Calvin wasn't actually driving the car at this point. Since then, the car hasn't been seen again. Calvin's disappearance is extremely strange. When someone goes missing with their vehicle, it's sadly often the case that they both accidentally ended up in some body of water. While these are being checked in Calvin's case, it's clear that this wasn't simply an accident while he was out delivering pizzas. Someone took Calvin's car, but who and why remains a mystery. Anyone with information on this case can contact the Brooklyn Heights Police Department at 216-741-2700. The mysterious disappearance of Joel Thomason is made all the more baffling by the fact that he was an Army reservist with a good deal of outdoor experience. Joel, who specializes in civil affairs and has earned his bachelor's degree in history, remains one of the many people who have disappeared in Yosemite National Park. He planned a solo hike from Hetch Hetchy Reservoir to Lake Eleanor and back between the 6th and 9th of September 2021, taking with him a bright red inflatable kayak, a yellow and gray Kelty brand backpack, a green sleeping bag, and blue-green hammock and blue zip-off pants. On the 6th of September, he was last seen by a park ranger as he reached a steep climb above a dam. When he was reported missing, park officials believed that he had decided to prolong his stay, extending his hike to Cherry Lake or to the Grand Canyon. When a search was launched, however, it included crews on the ground, in the air, and on the water. The path that he had intended to travel through was thoroughly searched along with the road between Cherry Lake and the canyon, but no sign of Joel was found. Searchers were baffled by the fact that none of his equipment or clothing could be found anywhere, and due to the very remote nature of the area where he disappeared, it's presumed that he has succumbed to the elements. Yosemite search and rescue personnel have since asked anyone who was in the Hetch Hetchy area since the 6th of September to contact YOSAR at 209-238-7046. On the 11th of October 2014, Jael Hamblin from Anchorage, Alaska, had been out to dinner with her roommate, Kendra Estrada, before returning home just before 10 p.m. Both women had left their children with Kendra's mother, who often babysat for them. After reaching home, Jael stated that she was thinking of going out again, but Kendra decided to call it a night and went to bed. That night, Jael had been rejected by a man who she was interested in, and at 1:40 a.m., she texted a male friend to say that she was upset and wanted to meet with him. She also exchanged text messages with another man just after 3 a.m., and this would be the last time that anyone heard from her. Kendra texted her in the morning at 10:32, but got no response, and when she went to check Jael's bedroom at around noon, she found that her bed was unmade and Jael was nowhere to be found. She noticed that her purse and cell phone were missing, but that Jael's car, a 1998 Ford Expedition, was still parked in the driveway. Kendra assumed that she had indeed gone out again, and hadn't returned home, which was not out of the ordinary. She sent 2 more texts that afternoon, but again got no response, and when she tried to call, only got Jail's voicemail. When Kendra's phone was analyzed later, it was found that her text messages hadn't been delivered, meaning that the phone was either turned off or the battery had died. On the 14th of October, Jail's mother reported her as missing, and it wasn't until March of the following year that her purse was found buried in snow along a trail. Inside were her social security card and her iPhone 5. It's believed that the purse was left there by someone else since Jail didn't enjoy hiking and temperatures were below freezing. Her case is being treated as a possible homicide due to the suspicious circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Multiple searches have been conducted, including one with a trooper helicopter, but Jail's disappearance remains unsolved to this day. In June of 2020, Sandra Johnson Hughes moved from Hawaii to California, and she decided to go on a solo hiking trip, partly to escape the possibility of being infected by COVID-19. She was an experienced outdoors woman, as she had trained to be a park ranger while in college. The last time that her family had contact with her was on the 26th of June, the same day as her mysterious disappearance. But since then, they have not heard from her, and she remains a missing person in Sierra National Forest. A search effort was launched, and a search team came across Sandra's campsite in the Johnson Meadows area of the forest. This was evidenced by personal documents belonging to Sandra that were found at the site. Later, her car was discovered abandoned near a creek, and it appeared to have been involved in an accident. Police believe that she lost control of the vehicle and hit a tree. Another hiker would later tell investigators that they saw Sandra near the scene of the accident, but she stated that she was okay and left the area. But that's where the trail runs cold, and investigators are at a loss as to what may have happened to her. She remains missing. However, on the 21st of July 2020, Jake and Victoria Gorba from California, who were in the same area for a weekend outing with their 3 children, experienced a strange event that is linked to Sandra's strange disappearance. The family had stopped to have lunch when their 3-year-old son, Caden, started talking to someone who wasn't there. When they asked him what he was doing, he pointed to a spot in the meadow and started describing a woman that he was talking to. He stated that she was wearing a black shirt, that she couldn't talk, and she was lying face down and needed their help. He also stated that she was deceased. Both Jake and Victoria immediately searched the area but couldn't find anyone, though the incident unnerved them so much that they decided to pack up and leave. Soon afterward, they decided to share the story on Facebook, and to their surprise, they were contacted by the Madera County Sheriff's Corporal, Chris Williams. He had spotted the post and realized that Caden had described Sandra down to the finest detail. This included her blue hair, the jeans and shirt that she was wearing, as well as the area where she went missing. Williams, along with Jake and Caden, drove back up to the area the following day, but they were unable to find any trace of Sandra, and her case remains an unsolved mystery. The strange, unexplained disappearance of Sandra Lee Davis began in the summer of 1974, when she, her husband, and 2 daughters moved from Utah to Alaska. In August of that year, her husband told her that he wanted a divorce, and Sandra became extremely upset as she was already unhappy with her life in Alaska. On the 30th of August, she decided to sign the divorce papers and was given custody of their children. However, she told her family that she planned to move to California, where she had lived previously, and would be leaving the children in the care of their father. At around 7 p.m., she started to cry and left the family's trailer. They assumed that she had gone to a payphone down the road as she had done the night before. On that occasion, she stayed away for about 3 hours, but this time she never returned. She had no money, identification, or extra clothes with her, and when she had still not come home the next day, her husband reported her missing. Initially, he was considered to be a suspect in her disappearance, but he agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed. A search was carried out with the use of police dogs, and they picked up her trail leading from the family's trailer to the payphone. But this was of little use, as she walked that route on a frequent basis. Soon after, Sandra's husband found a note that she had written in which she apologized for the failure of their marriage. But it was not dated and didn't give the impression that she planned to take her own life. The fact that she still remains missing also points away from this theory, as she would have very likely been found soon after. No further evidence was discovered, and investigators remain baffled as to what may have happened to her. Sandra's family continues to search for her, but at present, her fate remains unknown. In June of 2001, Thomas Nuzzi was staying at a Super 8 hotel in Alaska. He was last seen by his friends on the 15th of June, and on the 18th, he was captured on surveillance footage buying cigarettes, 2 lighters, chips, and a soda at a convenience store near the hotel on Minnesota Drive. On the 19th of June, he failed to show up for work and he was reported missing. Soon after his disappearance, his Jeep Cherokee was found with the keys still inside at a ski area 12 miles outside of Anchorage. Since his bike was found at his storage unit, police believed that he was on foot at the time that he went missing. A security guard would later inform police that he had seen a woman and a man who didn't fit Thomas's description trying to break into the Jeep at the hotel on the 15th of June. He did, however, recognize the woman as being with Thomas in the surveillance footage that was retrieved from the convenience store. On the 18th, people who were living across the street from the hotel contacted staff to inform them that 2 people, presumed to be the same couple, were trying to break into a car. A close friend of Thomas's, Harold, has stated that he found it strange that Thomas would buy cigarettes at the store, as he isn't a smoker, and would never allow anyone to smoke in his car. He also told police that he phoned Thomas's room on the 18th of June to find that he needed a ride to the airport the next day. But instead of hearing his friend's voice, an unidentified man answered and passed the phone to a woman who told him that Thomas had checked out. She then quickly hung up. They eventually made their way in and left with the vehicle, but the tale only gets stranger from there. A housekeeper at the hotel told police that she saw a man lying on the floor of Thomas's room on the morning of the 19th of June, the same day that Thomas was reported missing. She returned to the room at 1 p.m. and saw the same man, who wasn't Thomas, sitting on the bed. She asked him to leave and he complied, but neither he nor the woman that he was with have been seen since. Police have stated that the 2 are persons of interest in Thomas's disappearance, but they've been unable to identify them. The woman is described as being Caucasian, about 5'2", and very thin with dark hair past her shoulders. The man is also described as being very thin and tall, with dark skin and rotting teeth. Thomas's nephew, Stephen Reeves, decided to call all the numbers that had been dialed from Thomas's cell phone, but they mostly belonged to hotels and pagers, and no one that he spoke to had any information. Thomas's case still remains unsolved. In 2019, 27-year-old Jessica Boyce from New Zealand was suffering from depression, memory problems, and anxiety that were brought on by a car accident that she was involved in 2 years prior. She was referred by her doctor to the Marlborough Mental Health Service on 2 separate occasions, but she was turned away both times as she was not actively attempting to harm herself. On the 19th of March that year, Jessica's mother, Kay Johnstone, returned to their home after she'd been to a hospital appointment. When she arrived, she noticed that Jessica was missing, something that had happened on several occasions in the past. She also noticed that the family's red utility vehicle was missing, and she reported it as stolen to police, hoping that if Jessica was found with the vehicle, she could finally receive the help she needed with her mental health. On the 22nd, 2 hikers happened upon the vehicle close to Lake Chalice, which is located in the Mount Richmond forest. They contacted Kay, who in turn phoned the police, and she officially reported Jessica as a missing person. For the next 3 days, search and rescue teams investigated the area where the car was found, but no sign of Jessica or any clues as to what happened to her were ever found. Following the search, the investigation was put on hold by police until they could gather more information on the case. And on the 10th of May, Jessica's family revealed that she may have been abducted by people that they describe as not her friends. On the 22nd of October, police revealed that they were treating Jessica's mysterious disappearance as a homicide, and 2 properties were searched, with several items of interest and forensic samples being collected. Then in February of 2021, police announced that they believed the family's car was left in the park in an attempt to throw them off, and that they're in the process of interviewing 2 suspects and witnesses. Her family is anxiously awaiting further news, but for now, Jessica's disappearance remains unsolved. In 2011, Shawn Dickerson, a 23-year-old man from San Francisco, moved into an apartment on 22nd Street and Bartlett Street. He shared the apartment with 5 roommates, one of whom was Anjuli Droll, a close friend he had dated in high school 2 years earlier. He managed to find a job at Rolo, a men's clothing store, and was in the process of saving up money so that he and Droll could relocate to New York. On the 1st of December of that year, Shawn went to work where he underwent a work review from his boss and received his paycheck in cash since he didn't have a bank account. At around 1 p.m., he left the store to go to lunch at his apartment. When he hadn't returned to work later that afternoon, his boss grew concerned and left several messages on his phone, but Shawn never got back to him. At 11:30 that night, he messaged his boss to apologize for not returning to work, and his boss replied, saying that he would be fired if his unreliable behavior continued. Following the call, he stayed up with his roommates until about 4 a.m. The following day, he woke up at 11 a.m. and told his roommates that he was late for work. He was seen at 11 a.m. leaving the property, but he never arrived at the store and has not been seen or heard from since. After unsuccessfully trying to contact him, his family filed a missing person report with the San Francisco Police Department on the 6th of December. They found that instead of going to work on the day of his disappearance, he went for a walk and used his phone to take photos of the bay, his feet, and his food. At 4:02 p.m., he posted 16 photos to his Facebook page, which was called Klaus Agnes, after 2 of his favorite artists. Inside his room, they found his clothing, sunglasses, and his extra keys for the apartment. It was also found that he made one last phone call to his neighbor at 1:14 a.m. as he was walking home. His family reported that he had a tendency to disconnect from reality at times, though he has never been diagnosed with any mental disorders. No evidence was found that Shawn was a victim of foul play, and his disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. Anyone with information is asked to contact the San Francisco Police Department at 415-558-5508. The unsolved disappearance of 25-year-old Kimberly Jones took place on the 3rd of February 2009 in Parkersburg, West Virginia. At the time when she went missing, she was living at the Pinewood Village apartment complex at 2503 Beverly Street with her 5-year-old daughter. On that day, she had phoned her mother at about 3 p.m. to tell her that she'd been invited for dinner by her ex-boyfriend, Jack Crone, and his wife. Kimberly's mother stated that her daughter seemed normal during the call and didn't seem preoccupied with anything. Shortly after the call, Crone and his wife picked Kimberly and her daughter up at her apartment, and they spent the day together doing grocery shopping before going to the couple's house for dinner. After dinner at around 10:30 p.m., Crone drove Kimberly back to her apartment, leaving her daughter at their home as Crone is her father. But Kimberly never made it back to her apartment, and on the 8th of February, her mother reported her as a missing person at the Parkersburg Police Department as she couldn't get a hold of her. When Crone was interviewed, he stated that he dropped Kimberly off at her place, but drove away without seeing her actually enter the building. Inside, police found all of her belongings, including her clothing and medication that she took on a daily basis for bipolar disorder. There was no indication that she was planning to leave, and she had in fact circled numerous dates on her calendar for upcoming appointments. Shortly before her disappearance, she'd received a death benefit check from her father's passing, and it was found that both the check and her purse were missing. A stop order was put on the check, but no attempts have been made to cash it. Police have stated that they suspect foul play in her strange disappearance, and a $25,000 reward is being offered to anyone who has information on her whereabouts. Kimberly has a few distinctive physical features, such as a scar in the middle of her neck and a half-circle scar on her left arm. She also has a tattoo on her right shoulder of a red rose containing the name Kimmy Sue, as well as the name Jack on the rose's stem. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and a blue jacket. Anyone with information on Kimberly's case is urged to contact the Parkersburg Police Department at 304-424-8440 or contact your local FBI office. Marina Bolter, an 18-year-old woman from Bloomfield, Indiana, was last seen on New Year's Eve of 2014 before she vanished without a trace. At the time, she was in an on-again, off-again relationship with 22-year-old Douglas Lockhart, with whom she had a 9-month-old baby that had been placed in foster care. Marina had just moved into a new apartment and was working at an IGA grocery store located near South Highway 231. She'd been accepted into college and was planning to study towards becoming a pastry chef. On the night of her disappearance, Marina finished her shift at 6 p.m. and was seen walking across an old Sunoco gas station parking lot just north of her workplace. This was the last time that she was seen, and when she failed to report for her shift on the 2nd of January, her co-workers reported her as a missing person with the Bloomfield Police Department. Lockhart told police that he had spoken to her in the gas station's parking lot and asked if she wanted a ride to a party that he was attending that night, but she declined and got into another man's car, a silver or beige or gold-colored Mercury Milan instead. The man was later tracked down and when he was interviewed, told police that he knew Marina from the IGA store. He added that he simply gave her a ride home, dropping her off at a closed pizza restaurant across from her apartment, as she didn't want him to know her exact address. His identity has never been made public, despite the fact that he has prior convictions that include abduction. They also learned that at the time, Marina was dating a man who was much older than her, and he told police that he had spoken to her on the phone after her shift. She told him that she was planning to attend his New Year's Eve party, but she never showed up, and when he tried to contact her at her workplace the next day, he was unsuccessful. Marina's case still needs solving, and anyone with information is asked to contact the Bloomfield Police Department at 812-332-4411 or the Indiana State Police at 812-332-4411. 18-year-old Sebastian Hustad, better known to his friends and family as Ty, became a missing person on the 22nd of January, 2018. He had recently started a new job on a hog farm and had just moved into his own apartment in Centerville, Iowa. On the 21st of January, Ty phoned his older sister, Aisha, to ask if she would take him to the grocery store, as he didn't have a driver's license yet. She agreed, and when she returned him to his apartment, she took a load of his laundry with her to wash at home. Later that evening, she went back to Ty's apartment to return his laundry, but he didn't answer the door. She assumed that he was asleep as he'd been working long hours at his new job, so she left the laundry in front of his door. The following day, he caught a ride to work with a colleague who lived in the same apartment complex, and they traveled to the hog farm, which is located in Lineville, about an hour's drive away. Ty's boss would later confirm to police that he saw him that morning before Ty left for a work site where he would be doing power washing. But shortly after arriving at the site, Ty texted his brother, Malcolm, asking to be picked up as his coworker was acting strangely and aggressively towards him, and he was feeling uncomfortable. His brother decided to call him to get directions to the job site, but Ty never answered and has not been seen or heard from since. His family filed a missing persons report 2 days later at their Centerville Police Department, but since he was last seen in the Mercer County Sheriff's Department jurisdiction, they took over the case. Ty's coworker was brought in for questioning, but he refused to answer any questions about the events of that day, and he was eventually released. Police have searched the hog farm and have drained the ponds on the property, but to no avail. Ty remains a missing person, and anyone who knows of his whereabouts or has any information on the case can contact the Mercer County Sheriff's Office at 660-748-3165. In 2011, Canadian Army reservist Prob Deepstraw, known as Prob by his friends and family, moved from his home in Toronto, Canada, to the Gold Coast of Australia. Prob made the move to enroll at Bond University, where he was studying law to kickstart his career and the rest of his life. 2 years passed without incident, and in 2013, he took a trip back to Canada to see his new friends and family, who he had missed dearly. This would be the last time that they ever saw Prob alive. Following his return to Australia, Prob disappeared while on a trip in the Kosciuszko National Park. During his trip back home, Prob told his family that he had planned to visit the national park and see the Blue Mountains and Mount Kosciuszko. His friends and family weren't all too worried about Prob. After all, he was an Army reservist and knew how to survive in the wilderness and knew how to get around. On May 13, 2013, Prob hired a van from a company called Juicy, telling them that the van would be returned on May 15, 2013. He told his friends that he would be back in 2 days and went on his way. Prob never made it back to his van, and it wasn't until a member of staff at the park noticed his rental van with an out-of-date ticket on May 18, 2013, that the alarm was raised. This member of staff contacted Juicy and found out that they'd been trying to contact him as the van was overdue. When both parties realized that Prob had not been heard from in days, they contacted police and informed them that he was missing. The area where Prob was hiking was hit with heavy rain, snowfall, and below freezing temperatures, making the search and rescue effort for him all the more complex. According to news articles, Prob was only wearing jeans and a jumper when he set off on his hike. After 2 weeks, the search for Prob was called off by the New South Wales police, much to the disappointment of Prob's family. In place of an official investigation, members of Prob's family flew to Australia to begin their own privately funded search for him. In 2015, coroner Harriet Graham declared that Prob was deceased in absence, but as his body has never been found, his family haven't given up hope, saying miracles do happen. If you have any information about Prob's case, you're urged to contact the police station at 02-6450-3370. 70-year-old James Pruitt last made contact with his family on February 28, 2019, when he told them that he was headed for the Rocky Mountain National Park for a day hike. James drove his car up to the Glacier Gorge car park, parked his car, and has never been seen or heard from since. His family has told investigators and the media that they last spoke to him at around 10 a.m. on February 28, 2019, but he didn't tell them where he was going or which path he intended on taking. It wasn't until March 3, 2019, that James's car was found by rangers in the Glacier Gorge car park. The rangers who found the car noticed that there was no overnight sticker or permit, and promptly began their investigation. They were able to contact James's family, who confirmed that James had no intention of staying in the car park overnight, and that's when the search began. Park rangers were concerned for his well-being due to his age. His family told them that he was an experienced outdoorsman, but they were concerned as it was unlikely that he'd packed enough supplies for an overnight visit. Search and rescue teams, along with park rangers, searched within a 15 square mile radius, but found no sign of James. Their search was hampered by over 60 centimeters of snowfall, and for a brief period, the search teams were called off over fears for their own safety. Since James mysteriously vanished in February of 2019, search and rescue teams have regularly canvassed the area and searched for him, or any clues that may lead to answers. The local community and park rangers haven't forgotten about James, and he's still the subject of an ongoing investigation. 70-year-old James Pruitt was last heard from on February 28, 2019, at the Glacier Gorge Car Park in the Rocky Mountains National Forest. He's described as a white male with blue eyes and brown to gray hair, and is 5'6" and 150 pounds. He's believed to have been wearing a dark blue jacket, red-orange beanie, blue jeans, and was carrying a camera bag with a Nikon Coolpix 900 inside. If you have any information, you're asked to contact the Rocky Mountain National Park at 970-586-1204. On March 11, 2021, 24-year-old Cassie Sheets, along with two male friends, one of whom is believed to be Cassie's ex-boyfriend, hiked to the top of Spruce Knob in a national forest in West Virginia. At around midnight, the two companions claimed that they became separated from Cassie as they were making their way down Huckleberry Trail after making it to Spruce Knob. When the families of Cassie and the other two men realized that they had failed to return home, they contacted the authorities and reported them missing. Cassie's mother, Arlene, says that Cassie had never expressed an interest in hiking before, and that she had only gone up to Spruce Knob because her two male friends wanted to show her something up there. On March 12, 2021, the two men were safely located outside, with one being found by a car and another being found walking around the forest, but there was no sign of Cassie. Search and rescue crews assembled and began their search for Cassie, but found nothing. Law enforcement questioned the two men who were with Cassie, and they told them that they'd become separated around midnight. In a desperate attempt to find answers, Cassie's mother, Arlene, has placed a billboard on 536 Randolph Avenue with details of Cassie's disappearance and a number for people to call should they have any information. Arlene also regularly organizes searches of Spruce Knob and the surrounding areas and welcomes anyone in the area to join her in her search for her missing daughter. 24-year-old Cassie Sheets was last seen on March 11, 2021. She is described as a white female with blonde hair and blue eyes, and is 5'3" and 120 pounds. Cassie has numerous tattoos, the most notable being the names Ruby and Bella on her chest, along with multiple facial piercings as well as a belly button piercing. If you have any information, you're urged to contact the West Virginia State Police at 304-358-2200. In October of 2016, Chris Fowler was in the process of hiking along the Pacific Crest Trail that spans a whopping 2,650 miles from Mexico to Canada via California. The trail is incredibly popular with tourists and hikers, and each year, thousands of people pick up their hiking boots and walk along the trails. Some trails are short, taking only a few hours, while others may take days to complete, forcing hikers to camp and survive in the wilderness. Chris was an experienced hiker, with his stepmother, Sally, telling NBC News, quote, "He was a natural outdoorsman. His vacations mostly centered around hiking and camping. He just loved being outside among nature. It was soothing for him." In 2016, Chris had set out to hike the Pacific Crest Trail north to the border with Canada after a particularly difficult divorce. Sadly, Chris would never reach the finish line, and 5 years later, his family are still searching for him. Chris's parents had an agreement with Chris. Every 2 weeks or so, he would call, text or communicate with them via social media to let them know that everything was okay. So when the end of October rolled around and his parents hadn't heard from him, they started to panic. They began calling all of his friends, asking if they had spoken to him. They even contacted people that Chris had met along the way, but nobody had seen or heard from him. When Sally called the authorities to report him missing, she was met with resistance. The authorities believed that Chris simply wanted to be left alone, or that he had simply forgotten to keep in contact with them. But Sally wouldn't back down. In an NBC interview, she recalled that Chris had said to her, quote, "If I ever went missing, I'd want you to come find me, and I know you would." After pleading with authorities, Sally finally convinced them that Chris hadn't disappeared of his own free will, and an investigation was finally launched. Hikers in the area recalled seeing Chris at a Cracker Barrel off Highway 12 in Yakima County, Washington, on October 12, 2016. But since that date, Chris has never been seen or heard from again. In the wake of his disappearance, his stepmother, Sally, has taken to Facebook to keep Chris's case alive, and she has also helped to implement safety measures along the Pacific Crest Trail. She has also created a blog filled with advice for hikers along the PCT, where she stresses the importance of proper clothing, the use of sign-in sheets, and GPS radio communication devices. She told NBC, quote, "They call me Trail Mom. The responses I've received have been overwhelming. I've had people tell me that they're alive today because of my posts. It's the paying it forward that has pushed me through all of this." 34-year-old Chris Fowler was last seen off US Highway 12 in Yakima County, Washington, on October 12, 2016. He was on his way to finishing the Pacific Crest Trail at the border with Canada. Chris is described as a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes. He's 6'2" and 165 pounds, and anyone with information is urged to contact the Yakima County Sheriff's Office at 509-574-2500. Christopher Stephen Sylvia was last heard from on February 16, 2015, when he called his housemate asking him to meet him at a Buddhist temple on Chihuahua Valley Road in California the next day. Chris's housemate showed up at the temple, but there was no sign of him. At first, his housemate figured that Chris had either forgotten or no longer wanted to go to the temple, but as the hours passed, he knew something was wrong. On February 12, 2015, Chris left his apartment in San Diego County to go and hike the Pacific Crest Trail, heading south towards Campo, California. As previously mentioned, Chris called his housemate and asked him to meet him at the Buddhist temple, but never arrived. When Chris failed to make contact with his friends and family, a missing persons report was filed, and search and rescue teams from Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino came together to try to locate him. On February 20th, 2015, just days after Chris last made contact with his housemate, hikers making their way through the Pacific Crest Trail near mile marker 127 found Chris's sleeping bag, backpack, and ID card neatly laid out. This discovery gave new hope to the investigation, but after an extensive search of the area, no sign of Chris was found. Chris was described by family and friends as an experienced hiker, and it's unusual that he would leave his gear behind while hiking. Chris Sylvia is described as a white male with brown hair and hazel eyes. He's 5'9" and 155 pounds. He was last seen wearing a dark-colored sweater, green camouflage pants, and brown and black hiking boots. Chris has a tattoo down the side of his body, with the tattoo being described as Asian symbols. If you have any information, you're urged to contact the San Diego County Sheriff's Department at 858-974-2143. On the 2nd of August, 1947, 6 passengers and 5 crew members boarded an airliner known as Stardust from Buenos Aires, Argentina to Santiago, Chile. The passengers were Cassis Atala, Eric Gooderum, Harold Pogg, Peter Young, Paul Simpson, and Marta Limpert. The crew was made up of pilot Reginald Cook, his first and second officers, a radio telegraph operator, and a hostess. At 1:46 p.m., the Stardust took off on a flight that would take approximately 4 hours to complete, and for almost the entire journey, everything went to plan. At 5:41 p.m., however, a Morse code message was received by the airport in Santiago, which at first seemed to be a routine announcement of the plane's expected arrival at 5:45 p.m. But the message ended with the word Stendek, spelled S-T-E-N-D-E-C, which confused the airport operator. He asked for clarification, and the message was sent back twice more, Stendek, Stendek. The Stardust was just 4 minutes away from its expected landing time, but it never arrived and no further radio transmissions were received, giving birth to one of the greatest aviation mysteries of all time. An extensive search was carried out by the Argentinian and Chilean search and rescue teams, as well as other BSAA pilots. But for 51 years, the fate of the plane, as well as its passengers, remained unknown. Then, in 1998, 2 Argentinian mountaineers were climbing a mountain about 50 miles east of Santiago when they discovered parts of a Rolls-Royce Merlin aircraft engine and other debris belonging to the Stardust. In 2000, more of the wreckage was found by an Argentinian army expedition, which included a propeller and wheels, one of which was still inflated 53 years later. They noted that the wreckage was localized rather than strewn over a large area, leading investigators to believe the plane hit the ground head-on and the landing gear was not deployed, ruling out an emergency crash landing. It's believed that due to the heavy cloud cover, the pilot would not have had sight of the ground, forcing him to rely on his instruments instead. The plane had just entered a jet stream, which was not well understood at the time, and the pilot erroneously assumed that they'd cleared the Andes mountain range, starting his descent and crashing into the mountainside at high speed. As for the last message sent, many theories have been proposed. Some believed that the crew suffered from hypoxia, causing them to become confused and scrambling the word descent into Stendek. Other theories suggest that the word was short for starting en route descent or severe turbulence encountered, now descending emergency crash landing. It's unlikely, however, that we will ever learn what the message truly meant. Jaden Pinoto-Met, a 22-year-old from Newcastle, Australia, left his home on the 28th of December 2017. He and a friend Lucas were on a 3-day boys' road trip, and upon reaching their location, the pair would celebrate New Year's Eve with more than a dozen other young people who were all members of a friendship group known as the Deadbeat Drug Club on Facebook. While still in Newcastle, the two friends bought a variety of narcotics, which they would be taking to the festivities, and hence they had decided to travel by car rather than take a flight with the rest of the group for fear of being detained at the airport. Jaden made sure to keep in contact with his family, phoning his mother on the 29th and telling her that their 19 hours of driving had been good, and that he was looking forward to his holiday, and that he would phone her again at their next stop. When she'd not heard back by the 30th, she tried calling him, but would get his voicemail every time. Later that day, she would ask again if he was okay, and he simply replied, yeah, which she found strange. As Jaden and Lucas drove towards their location, both men partook of the drugs, and on the morning of December 31st, Jaden claimed that he'd lost some of the drugs that he was intending to sell to their friends. He insisted that they stop to look for them near the remote town of Charters Towers. He would search his bags 8 or 9 times to no avail, all the while becoming increasingly aggravated. When he eventually located some of the narcotics, he smashed his phone on the ground and started walking into a nearby tree line. When Lukas followed, Jaden yelled at him to leave him alone and continued into the bushland. He was only reported missing on January 3rd, and despite exhaustive search efforts, he has still not been found. Brooklyn Farthing, known as Brooke, was an 18-year-old woman from Kentucky. On the 21st of June, 2013, she and her sister Paige had just had their driving tests, which Brooke passed, but Paige unfortunately didn't. After the test, they traveled to a restaurant where they met up with their other sister Tasha and their mother Shelby. After leaving the restaurant, they attended their grandfather's 70th birthday party, which was held at their grandmother's house. Brooke stayed at the party for a while before leaving for yet another party held at Red Lick Road, joined by Paige and one of their cousins. Paige and the cousin didn't stay at the party for long and headed home. But Brooke stayed since many of her friends were there, and she packed an overnight bag to stay at a friend's house. At one point in the evening, Brooke's friend decided to leave the party with a man, sparking an argument between her and Brooke, and the friend left without her. After another of her friends became too intoxicated to travel home alone, she borrowed a car from a friend of her ex-boyfriend's to take him home. She then drove the car back to the owner, whose name has not been released, who had by now returned to his own house at Dillon Court. The house was in a sorry state, having been foreclosed on and having no electricity or running water. During the early morning hours, Brooke kept in touch with her sister, saying that she would be home as soon as she could get a ride, and making plans to attend a car show later that day. Then at around 4 a.m., she texted her ex-boyfriend, asking him to take her home, but he replied that he would only be able to pick her up at the end of his shift, which was at 7 a.m. At 4:26 a.m., he received another series of texts. The first read, "Please hurry." The second said, "I'm scared." And the third said, "Hurry." At 5:30 a.m., however, he received another text saying, "Never mind, I'm okay. I'm going to a party in Rockcastle County." He texted back to ask who she was going with, but he never received a reply, and, believing that she was fine, left for his home at 7 a.m. At the same time, the owner of the house, Joshua Hensley, arrived home to find his house on fire. He'd seen Brooke sitting on a couch inside the house earlier, before he had to leave to check on some horses. The couch was now burned down to the frame, causing a hole in the floor, and the only signs of Brooke were her boots and overnight bag, which were on the porch. After an extensive search, Brooke remained missing, and firefighters described the house fire as suspicious. Brooke's ex-boyfriend stated that he doesn't believe the last text he received was really from her, and at present she has still not been found. On October 24th of 2019, Niels Becker from Melbourne, Australia set out on a 5-day hike in Victoria's Alpine National Park. The hike was a birthday present to himself that he'd been planning for months in advance. Niels was an experienced bushwalker who was very familiar with the area, and he made sure to take the necessary supplies, including a cell phone. Before setting off, he notified his family and Mansfield police of his plans. Niels followed the Australian Alps walking track for the first 3 days, starting at Upper Jameson Hut and heading towards Vallejo Gantner Hut, where he sent a text message to his family in which he explained he was on his way to Mount Sterling. From here, he planned to hike back to his car. The last leg of his hike would have taken between 6 and 7 hours, but that was the last time anyone heard from him. He was spotted by a local man in an area known as Button Man's Camp, which was close to a few areas with radio reception known as the Crossroads. After he didn't return to his car as expected, a search was conducted by more than 70 people during heavy snowfall, but Niels was never found. 4 months after the end of World War II, on December 5, 1945, 5 Avenger torpedo bombers left the Naval Air Station at Fort Lauderdale at 2 p.m. The planes were part of a routine 2-hour patrol, which would head east for 150 miles and north for 40 miles before heading back to base. The pilots at the helm of the 5 aircraft were highly experienced, and the skies were typical for Florida, sunny with high visibility. 15 minutes before the patrol was due to arrive at their base, the Fort Lauderdale tower received a call from the flight leader. This was expected, as he would be asking for landing instructions, but instead he sounded confused and concerned, saying they couldn't see land and that they seemed to be off course. The tower replied, asking for their position, and after a few moments of silence, he replied, "We cannot be sure where we are. Repeat, we cannot see land." For the next 10 minutes, all contact was lost, and the tower personnel scanned the skies, hoping to catch a glimpse of the planes, but to no avail. When contact was made again, the tower heard the voices of the crewmen, sounding confused and frantic, saying they couldn't find West and that everything seemed wrong. They were heard saying everything looks strange, even the ocean. Following this message, there was another loss in communications, and when they were restored, the flight leader informed the tower that he had given command over to another pilot. The new leader would contact the tower 20 minutes later in hysterics, his voice trembling as he stated, quote, "We can't tell where we are. Everything can't make out anything." He would go on to tell the tower that they were about 225 miles northeast of the base before rambling incoherently for the next few moments. Finally, their last message came through. They said, "It looks like we're entering white water. We're completely lost." After this, there was nothing but silence. Minutes later, a Mariner flying boat, equipped for a rescue mission, was sent to look for Flight 19 at its last approximate position. The pilot would check in with the tower 10 minutes later, and just like the other 5 planes, disappear without a trace. Ships from the Coast Guard and US Navy would search the area along with other aircraft looking for flares, oil slicks, or life rafts, but despite clear skies, middling winds, and calm seas, none of the aircraft or their passengers would ever be found. The build-up to the Napoleonic Wars was the perfect time for an attempt on the life of a British diplomat traveling through Europe. At least, that was the opinion of Benjamin Bathurst, the diplomat in question who was certain someone was coming to attack him. On the night of November 25, 1809, Bathurst's worst fears came true, as he vanished without a trace in Brandenburg while on his way back to Britain. Everything from the paranormal to his own paranoia has been blamed for his disappearance, but the truth will likely never be uncovered. Bathurst was a relatively wealthy man, related to the British Foreign Secretary, and married to the daughter of Baronet. In the early 1800s, he was a minor diplomat, and in 1809, he was sent to meet the Austrian Emperor. The aim of the mission was to strengthen ties with the country and to convince the Emperor to declare war on France. Bathurst was sent despite the fact he didn't speak German and didn't have much experience in the role. The trip to Austria went without a problem, though Bathurst seemed concerned the entire journey that someone was out to get him. He refused to let his carriage driver help a woman at the side of the road, fearing that it was an ambush. When one of the people he was traveling with told him he was being paranoid, he accused the man of being part of a conspiracy to kill him. While it was a dangerous time in Europe, there was little evidence anybody was after Bathurst. The paranoia didn't impact Bathurst's ability to do the job, and he succeeded in convincing Austria to declare war. Unfortunately for Austria, the war didn't go as planned and Bathurst was recalled to London. He and his attendant traveled with assumed names north through Prussia. On the night of November 25th, they arrived in Perlberg, a town near Berlin. They requested a carriage to be arranged and spent the evening at a local inn. Bathurst spent most of the night in his room writing a number of letters and burning many in the room's fireplace. When it came time to leave, he and his attendant went to the carriage together. Bathurst disappeared out of his attendant's sight as he went around to the other side of the carriage. When his attendant followed him there, he was nowhere to be seen. Bathurst's attendant and the carriage driver searched the local area. It took a while for authorities to get involved, but when they did, they searched the river and the surrounding woodland, but found no sign of him. Eventually, a few items of his clothing were found, including trousers with bullet holes, though there was no blood. It was suspected he'd been robbed for his clothes and left to perish, though nobody was ever found. The disappearance of First Lieutenant Felix Monla and Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson is one of the most infamous aircraft-related mysteries in history. The two Air Force personnel were investigating an unidentified flying object over Lake Superior when their jet disappeared from the radar. No wreckage was ever recovered, and a satisfying explanation has never been given. The UFO was spotted on radar in the early evening of November 23, 1953. It was dangerously close to the US-Canadian border and not far from the Kinross Air Force Base. At 6:22 p.m., a high-spec jet was sent to investigate. Monla was an experienced man with hundreds of flight hours and more than 120 in crafts similar to the one he was piloting that night. Wilson would have been on radar duties. Though the craft they were chasing was a UFO, it's important to know that doesn't necessarily mean it was anything paranormal or extraterrestrial. It was simply an aircraft that hadn't been identified and wasn't supposed to be there. But it was important to figure out what it was and make sure it didn't interfere with any activities going on over the lakes. Things became odd when Wilson struggled to track the object with the onboard radar. Apparently it kept changing course. Instead, ground control had to direct the jet with their own radar. The object was incredibly fast, and Monla chased it for over half an hour, though didn't appear to ever give a description of what he was seeing in the air, if he saw anything at all. Eventually, radar showed the Air Force jet had caught up with the UFO. The blips representing the two aircraft had merged, then the radar return for the Air Force craft dropped off the scope. The UFO continued for a while longer, indicating ground control's radar device was still working before it too vanished. The US Air Force and Coast Guard and their Canadian counterparts all searched the lake for any sign of the missing airmen, but came up empty-handed. At first, this was the story given by the Air Force to the press, but speculation about UFOs and aliens meant they soon retracted the statement. Now it was a Canadian plane that had stayed off course. Monla and Wilson had successfully identified the plane before Monla was stricken with vertigo and crashed the plane. Given the depths of Lake Superior, the plane couldn't be retrieved. While this was definitely a more plausible explanation, the Canadian Air Force denied any such plane had been in the area, and information about the incident had been scrubbed from the record. It seems likely Monla and Wilson met something above Lake Superior, possibly an experimental aircraft owned by the US itself, but until a wreckage site is discovered, the UFO speculation will continue. Victor Grayson was a socialist politician and a journalist who disappeared in 1920 after threatening to expose a politician who was selling honors. Grayson's political career left him with few friends, and it was months before he was reported missing. It was widely assumed that he'd been murdered for getting too close to uncovering the secrets of powerful people, though people who knew him before he became famous claimed he'd been paid off and was now living a quiet life as a shop owner. Grayson became interested in politics while at university. He was studying for a career in religion, but came to the conclusion that the only way he could make lives better was through politics. He was a radical thinker at the time, campaigning for women's rights to vote and for more power to the workers. He ran in a by-election in 1907, but wasn't supported by the Independent Labour Party, which he was a part of. The party had an agreement with another left-wing party not to run against one another, so as not to split the votes, but Grayson ran anyway and won. While a member of the parliament, he made many speeches condemning the government for abandoning the working-class people, and even turned his anger against fellow left-wing politicians for being traitors. He wanted a revolution, while left-wing parties at the time wanted to make a difference from inside the system. He failed to get re-elected, on part due to alcohol problems, and spent many years giving pro-socialist speeches before the First World War. Unlike many socialists at the time, he was for the war and served in the New Zealand military because he believed the British Empire was the best way to spread his socialist ideals. After the war, he tried to restart his political career in the UK with little success, and turned his attention to Ireland. But at this point, there were numerous rumors about him, including that he was being paid by MI5. He started working as a journalist and accused the British Prime Minister of being part of a scheme to sell honors such as knighthoods. The main person behind the plot he would not name, but threatened to if nothing changed. Shortly after his accusation, he was beaten up while walking in London. He wasn't too badly injured, and it appeared to simply be an attempt to scare him. The attempt didn't work, and he continued to make his accusations. On September 28, 1920, he was out drinking with friends when he received a telephone message. He told them he would be back shortly and then disappeared. Later that afternoon, a painter working on the riverbank noticed Grayson, accompanied by two men, walk into a house later discovered to be owned by Arthur Gregory, the man Grayson believed was selling peerages. This was the last time Grayson was confirmed to have been seen, though decades later an old friend would claim to have found Grayson running a shop. He'd allegedly wanted to step away from the public life and had been given a chance to start again. Khachatur Abovian was one of the most important figures in the history of Armenian literature. He lived and worked at a turbulent time in Eastern Europe, and his belief in an Armenian national state meant his disappearance in 1848 became linked to numerous political groups. Khachatur was a well-educated young man, earning a Russian state scholarship and teaching at a school. He wrote about the struggles of the Armenian people during the Russia-Persian War, using the common Armenian dialect rather than the classical language, which was popular with most scholars. Khachatur's writing was closely linked to his politics, and his politics were very closely linked to his education in Russia. Armenia was at the time split between the Russian and Ottoman empires, a split that only became more permanent during the Russia-Persian War. Khachatur believed Russia would help the country to become an independent nation, and felt deeply betrayed when Russia came down hard on the Armenians living in its empire. In the late 1930s, Khachatur married a woman named Emilia of German and Estonian descent. Together they had two children, a son and a daughter, who he was very close to. His children were 8 and 5 years old when, on April 2, 1948, their father left his home for an early morning walk, but he would never come back. Despite later Russian governments making Khachatur an important historical figure, few details are known about the nature of his disappearance. His wife didn't even report him missing until a month after he had vanished. By that point, there was no trace of him and no evidence at his home, which might have hinted at what happened to him. Some suggest Khachatur staged his own disappearance or even commit suicide, though his family at the time didn't believe he would abandon his children. Historians have suggested that he may have been forcibly exiled to Siberia, something which happened to a number of people living in the area at the time. Other possibilities include leaving to take part in the European revolutions or being killed by Turkish debtors. Dorothy Arnold was a wealthy socialite and an aspiring writer who disappeared in New York in December of 1910. It wasn't until the following year that her family, fearful of publicity, finally got the police involved. By that point, it was too late to locate the missing 25-year-old. Despite her wealth, Dorothy was going through a number of problems at the time of her disappearance. She lived with her parents, who ridiculed her dream of becoming a writer. This wouldn't have been too bad were it not for the multiple rejection letters she received from magazines she sent her short stories to. Her parents were also disapproving of her boyfriend, a man named George Grissom. He also came from wealthy parents, but he was almost 20 years older than Dorothy and didn't hold down a job. Dorothy's father, Francis, believed his daughter should be with someone who had to work to occupy his mind. Dorothy's mother, Mary, was also ill at the time of her disappearance. Despite only recently receiving a rejection letter from a popular magazine, Dorothy seemed upbeat and cheerful in early December of 1910. On December 12th, she told her mother she was going out to buy a dress for her sister's party. Mary offered to go with her, but Dorothy told her she would call if she found one that was suitable. Dorothy made a number of stops on her trip, purchasing a box of chocolates and a book. At 2 p.m., she bumped into a friend, who she told she was going to walk through Central Park before returning home. This was the last confirmed sighting of Dorothy. Her family grew concerned when she didn't show up for dinner and called around to Dorothy's friends to see if she'd stopped with any of them, but she hadn't. Later that evening, one of her friends called back, checking to see if Dorothy had returned yet. Mary said that she had, but she had a headache so she couldn't come to the phone. It would turn out this was a lie. The following day, the family called a friend who was a lawyer to look into the case. Searching her room, they came up with no answers. Her father suspected George, who was in Italy at the time, had something to do with her disappearance, but he claimed to have no idea where Dorothy was. Finally, in January of 1911, the family got the police involved, and a reward of $1,000 was offered for Dorothy's safe return. Police received countless fake leads, and the Arnolds were sent 2 ransom notes, though these 2 turned out to be fake. By February, it appeared the Arnolds had given up the search for their daughter, believing she was dead, though no evidence was ever found. A few years later, an illegal abortion clinic was uncovered, and one of the doctors claimed to have accidentally killed Dorothy in an abortion gone wrong. This, however, seemed unlikely, as Dorothy didn't suspect she was pregnant at the time. Another criminal claimed to have killed Dorothy on the orders of a rich man and buried her in the basement of a house. Again, there was no evidence to say if this was the case. 20-year-old Tony Jones was in the final weeks of his 6-month backpacking holiday around Australia. Originally from Perth, Tony had set out in May of 1982 on what he called a working backpacking holiday, where he would take on odd jobs in exchange for food, shelter, or money. Tony planned on using this method to get from one place to another before ending the trip, where he would meet up with his brother Tim Jones and the pair would return home together. Only Tony Jones never made it to the mountain they'd scheduled to meet at, and he's been considered a missing person ever since. The 2 brothers had even met up sporadically during their respective trips, spending time together at the Sun City Caravan Park in Townsville. In October of 1982, the 2 parted ways, with Tim setting off on a 900-kilometer bike ride to Mount Isa, while Tony opted for a quicker route before making his leg of the journey to the mountain. The last time that Tony was ever heard from was on November 3, 1982, when he placed 2 calls, one to his family and one to his girlfriend. Tony and his brother Tim would frequently leave messages for each other with their family to be passed on the next time they called. Tony's mother informed him that she'd transferred $150 into his account for him and Tim to share before saying her goodbyes. Tony was last seen walking down the Flinders Highway and is believed to have been picked up by a group of young people from whom he hitched a ride. Tony was immediately reported missing after he didn't reach Mount Isa, and Tim discovered that $150 had been transferred into his account. Tony Jones has not been seen or heard from since November 3rd, and his bank account has not been accessed, nor has he made contact with any friends or family. There's currently a $250,000 reward for any information about Tony Jones, and those with information are asked to contact the Queensland Police at 131-444 or at 617-3055-6206 for international callers. Jean Virginia, also known as Jaimie Springer, is just one of many women involved in the tragic Highway of Tears in British Columbia, Canada. Jenny was last seen on October 14, 1971, and was just 18 years old at the time of her disappearance. Sadly, over time, her case has remained cold. Friends and family described Jenny as quiet and shy, but was a loving sister who made every effort to look after her siblings and care for them when times became tough. Jenny worked at the Royal Packing Company's salmon canning plant in Claxton to help provide for her family, and as soon as she finished her shift, she would be right back home to take care of her siblings. So when Jenny mysteriously vanished, everyone in her family commented on how extremely out of character it was. Jenny always let them know where she was going and what time she would be back home. Jenny was last seen on October 14, 1971, on a bridge just off Highway 16. At the time of her disappearance, Jenny was hanging out with her cousin, Alvin, who at some point during the day decided to cycle home and get a jacket. Alvin testified that he told Jenny to stay where she was and he would be back soon. As he was cycling back towards her, Alvin told police that he heard a car door slam and Jenny had simply vanished. The RCMP and her family commented that Jenny vanished following the sudden disappearance of her boyfriend. Jenny was said to have been heartbroken and extremely upset about his disappearance, but it wasn't in her nature to just run away. Her boyfriend's body was later recovered after he was found to have drowned in the Skeena River. Jenny was reported missing and the RCMP launched an investigation into her disappearance, but sadly, after 8 days, the search was called off due to bad weather. Jenny Simper is described as having brown hair and brown eyes. DNA is available for comparison, and those with any information are urged to contact the New Hazelton RCMP at 250-842-5244. 31-year-old Janine Vaughn had her whole life ahead of her. She was described by friends as fun and loving and outgoing, with one friend telling the Australian newspaper, quote, "She was always there to lend a hand for anyone that needed it, always putting herself last. She was a social person, she liked going out to meet people, and she liked to drink." So when Janine mysteriously vanished on December 7th, 2001, friends and family knew that something was very wrong. On December 7th, Janine and a group of friends had been spending the night drinking in New South Wales. At around 3:47 a.m., the group left the Metro Tavern with the intent of heading back to another place called the Ox. Friends from the night in question testified that Janine was walking 40 meters in front of them when they saw her getting into a bright red four-door sedan car, though it was thought to be a late 90s Mitsubishi Magna or a Toyota Camry. This was the last time that Janine Vaughn was ever seen alive, and now her family are desperate for answers. In a strange twist, Lynette Borland, who has no connection to the case, came forward with information about the car that Janine was last seen getting into. Lynette described to the newspaper, The Australian, how she'd been followed by a man in a bright red four-door sedan while she was also returning home from a night out. She told the newspaper, quote, "I wanted to move, but for those seconds or whatever it was, I had a panic attack and I just couldn't make myself run. The next thing I knew, he was out of the car and I think he said, 'Excuse me, I want to talk to you,' or 'Can I talk to you?'" Lynette was able to provide a physical description of the driver, explaining that he was at least 6 feet tall, with dark hair and pale skin. She also mentioned that he had very hairy arms, a square jaw, and that he was described as having a bumpy nose. Something in Lynette's brain told her to run, and that's exactly what she did. She ran to the nearest service station and noticed that the car's number plate had been crudely painted over. When she reached safety, she recorded the number plate as she felt that something wasn't quite right. Little did she know that just moments later, a similar event would happen to Janine Vaughn, though Janine wouldn't be so lucky. Sadly, Lynette lost the piece of paper that she used to write down the registration of the car, but did remember that it began with ICU. The New South Wales Police Force has recently offered up a $1 million reward and is urging anyone with information to contact Australian Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. In 2003, honors high school student Laquanta Riley was living in Alabama after moving there from Georgia, where she'd attended high school. Laquanta had recently gained a scholarship to study forensic science and criminal justice at the local university, and was excited to get a start in her studies and have a long career in forensic science ahead of her. Laquanta had been raised by her aunt, as her mother had been too young to take care of her. Nevertheless, her mother is said to have played an active role in her life. During the Thanksgiving period of 2003, Laquanta had left her apartment that she shared with a roommate for unknown reasons. On December 5th, Laquanta returned to the apartment to pick up the last of her items, and while she was at the apartment, something happened that deeply upset her. It upset her enough that she called her mother for a ride, but her mother wasn't able to help. So instead, she called her aunt, who lived in Montgomery, Alabama, and made arrangements to move in with her while she got back on her feet. Just 2 days later, on December 7th, Laquanta Nichelle Riley was seen leaving home for the last time. An unknown person driving a dark green four-door car, described as possibly a Ford Taurus or a Chevrolet Caprice, drove Laquanta to her mother's house. Laquanta met her brother at the front door, who gave her a jacket and asked her who was driving the car as she didn't recognize him. Laquanta didn't give a name and reassured him that it was someone she knew in the neighborhood. Laquanta got back into the car and she hasn't been seen since. Laquanta's mother received a disturbing voicemail message on December 10th, 2003. A woman's voice can be heard saying, "Leave me alone," or "Let me go home," with a man's voice saying Laquanta's name before disconnecting the call. Laquanta's mother is adamant that the woman in the call is her daughter, but due to the poor audio quality, the police are unable to comment further. Laquanta Riley is considered endangered and missing and is described as an African-American female with black hair and brown eyes. She has both ears pierced as well as a tongue piercing and a tattoo of R.I.P. Misha on her bicep. She was last seen getting into the dark four-door car on December 7, 2003. She's about 5'8" and 200 pounds and was last seen wearing a yellow and green Echo brand shirt, stonewashed blue jeans, green and yellow Reebok trainers, and a silver bracelet. If you have any information, you're asked to contact the Montgomery Police Department at 334-241-2350. The case of Michael Martin has left residents of the Greater Manchester stunned. Michael was last seen at a petrol station in Kersley Bolton on August 7, 2016 after catching a ride with a friend. Disturbing CCTV footage shows the car that the pair were in stopping in the middle of the street unexpectedly. According to the Bolton News, the key to the ignition had broken from the inside, which had caused a failure. Luckily, the two were able to jumpstart the car before being hit by oncoming traffic, and they sought shelter at a nearby Esso garage. What unfolded next would leave police and Michael's family stunned. Michael can be seen on CCTV walking around the petrol station looking agitated and almost like he's looking over his shoulder at something. He then called the friend that he was with and told him he needed to come out of the shop immediately, though his friend replied that he was looking for tools or someone that could help them with the car. After this conversation, Michael, wearing only one shoe, is seen running across the road and into an alleyway. His friend commented that he didn't know why he didn't just get back in the car until help arrived. Since his mysterious disappearance, Michael has never contacted his friends or family and hasn't accessed his bank account or used his national insurance number. Almost 5 years on, Michael's family are still appealing for answers. They also commented that he suffers from a mental health condition and is considered vulnerable. Detective Superintendent Lewis Hughes of the Greater Manchester Police told newspapers, quote, "A body has never been recovered, therefore a post-mortem can't take place. There are no witnesses that have come forward and there's no crime scene and no murder weapon. Michael has literally disappeared off the face of the earth. There's currently a $50,000 reward for any information leading to Michael's whereabouts. If you know anything about his case or Michael, you're asked to contact 0161-856-8797. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.